Okay, so welcome back, everyone. I hope that yesterday went over okay. I tried to go through all the content as slowly as possible, so that you also had enough time to sort of watch what I was doing and then replicate it on your side. So I'll do the same today. I'll try and step through things fairly slowly. I might pick up the pace here and there to try and cover as much of the content as possible. But if there are a couple of things here and there that we sort of skip over, just know, like I said yesterday, that the website is there and you can sort of make your way through that content independently. And if you still run into any trouble, I mean, we will be available. You've got our emails. You can always reach out to us if you have any issues. Okay, so let's just quickly recap what we did yesterday. So just to refresh your memories, yesterday we obviously did a bit of background and introduction to the shell. We did do a bit of navigating files and directories, and so we learned quite a few commands. The commands we interacted with quite a lot yesterday were things like the ls command, so that's listing. We interacted with cd, the change directory command, and there were several other commands that we learned during the sort of navigating files and directories and working with files and directories. So we learned make the mkdir, so that's to make a directory, for example. Apologies. We also learned to remove files and folders and how to do that. We learned about removing things recursively, and also moving things recursively. So we also learned the mv command move. We also learned a little bit about redirection, so redirecting outputs into a file. And then we also touched on pipes, but not too extensively. But we did do a little bit of pipes, so taking the output of one command and piping it into another command, as a way to build up your scripts and do sometimes some complex things in just a few bits of code. So yesterday, we had thought that you could possibly just do this little exercise as a little bit of homework, and that we would come back and we could run through this exercise together as a group. I did also think that we could do the next exercise because it's introducing you to a little bit of code that's a little bit different and maybe a bit more complex compared to what you've seen before. So I thought we could also step through what this code is doing. It does explain this here for you quite well, but I thought that we could address this as a group and also just run through it on our own terminal so that we get the feel for how it interacts in the outputs and so on. And then I wanted us to just go through, the whole NITheCS case study. So this is sort of the next portion of what NIThe needs to do on her own. So we haven't heard about NIThe in a while, but we'll go through the original case study. I'll just go through it with you again. I think I had it open here somewhere. Yeah, so I just wanted to read through this problem or case study again so that you can refresh your minds about what we're trying to do with this lesson in totality. So this is the main sort of exercise that should carry through all lessons. But this was going to be the first time we actually do something that addresses this problem with this pipes exercise. So I thought we could do this and sort of start off the lesson with this, and then we'll carry on to cover loops, do a bit of shell scripts, and then also do a bit of just searching your file structure with the command line. I'm not sure that we'll have time to get through absolutely every exercise and absolutely every portion of every lesson. And so here and there, I might cherry pick things a little bit just so that I'm sure that we've covered all of the foundational content, so that conceptually, you understand all the main elements that we want to communicate with this lesson. And then you can always come back to this workshop website and try some of the things that we might have skipped. Reach out to us if you get stuck. And perhaps in future we could run this workshop again. Maybe we can restructure it slightly so that we can maybe get through more of the exercises or so on, and you could always join us again for another day or two. So I think that should also be possible, but let's see how we go today. So just as a way of also checking in with everyone, I just want to see if, based on yesterday's content, everybody is okay. Did everybody manage to follow along yesterday? Manage to do some of the exercises that we were doing and follow along on their end? Did you manage to get the outputs, that we were demonstrating on the screen? So you're all good to kind of get going today. There's no gaps in perhaps your understanding of anything, at least not yet. Cool. Okay. Okay, great. So I'm seeing a couple of thumbs up. So I hope that everything's fine. Okay, so Sane's also saying so far so good. Okay, that's good to hear. Sure. So let's get going with the rest of the pipes and filters sort of lesson. So we'll start with the exercise that was sort of for homework, but we can also discuss it here as a group. It's always sometimes nice to discuss some of these exercises. It helps with your understanding quite a bit, but let me just see firstly, had anybody had a chance to look at this exercise? I see a thumbs up from Sine. Great. So when you looked at this exercise, did you just run through all of these commands and just sort of see what it did? Do you want to give us maybe an update on what you saw?
I just kind of did it in my head and I was like, okay, we take the top 5 lines. Then we take the bottom 3. Initially, I was a bit confused and I wanted to take the bottom 3 of the original list, but I was like, okay, no, it's the bottom 3 of those 5 we've cut out. And then you sort it, and we learned that just above that minus R tells us we're sorting in reverse. And we put that into a text file. I think when I did it in my head, I didn't do the sorting correctly, but I roughly know that it should be sorted. So if I look at the solution, I can double check that, yeah, that makes sense, sorting wise. I'm not going to expect myself to do the computer's work too much.
No problem. That's cool. Okay, great. No, so I think you got it conceptually, which is which was kind of the aim of this exercise. It was more of a conceptual think about it, think through it. And a lot of the time when you look at code like this, you can see what it does. And I mean, eventually you will read code in that way anyway. When you're reading multiple lines of code, you will begin to see exactly what the code does. And that's kind of the purpose of these kinds of comprehension exercises as well. Yandile, you've got your hand raised. Please go ahead.
Yes, hi. Hello.
Good morning.
How are you?
Doing well, in yourself?
No, I'm okay. I wanted you to explain the recursive part.
Okay.
Let's sort by, sort. Yeah.
Oh, you mean this sort command here?
Yes, that one.
Sure. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to demonstrate it. And then we'll take a look at what it does. So I'll do the sort without the minus R first, and then I'll do the sort with the minus R, and then we look at how it changes, okay?
Can I just add something? Yandile,
Sure.
the annoying thing that I've noticed is that the letter R will stand for something else depending on the command. So here the R stands for reverse. So it's just going backwards. But in a different, like here with our head and tail, we see an N for lines, but when we were sorting, N stood for numerically. So it keeps changing what it means. So this is just, it's going backwards. And that's the very annoying part, I think, about the shell, is you have to, for each command, each letter has a different meaning.
This is not the recursive.
Not recursive, yeah, it's just reverse. Yeah, it's a pain.
Yeah, I see it now. Thank you.
Okay, sorry,
no, thanks, Sine.
Question for you.
No, that's fine. I wanted to just demonstrate it so that you could see how the command functions. But no stress. Thanks for that, Sine. So yeah, that's a good point that you raised. Oh, yeah. But it's a good point that you raised, that you have to actually not remember, but perhaps need to just go back and remind yourself sometimes what this minus R means within the context of this command. And I know that that is something that is very, very tricky. And I think it is one of those things that, you know, sometimes may deter people from the command line. But I also think that the more you use it, the more comfortable you get, and it becomes sort of like secondhand. You know when it means recursive and when it means in reverse, and so on and so on. But yeah, it just kind of is what it is, I guess. And we have to work with how the shell works. But let us demonstrate this example so we can actually, yeah.
So in this case, will it sort of be like the tail will go to the top and then the head will go to the bottom?
Exactly. So what's happening here is, and I'm going to step through it in such a way that I'm going to do each bit of the code separately so that you can see how it influences the output. But essentially, let me talk you through what's going to happen with this particular line of code. And I'll talk you through what each thing means, and then I'll demonstrate it for you. So essentially, cat just prints something out to the screen, right? So when we say cat animals.csv, what we are essentially saying is just print the contents of this file onto the screen. That's the first thing we are saying. Now we are saying with the second bit, take the contents. So remember with the pipe, what we're doing is we're taking the output from one command and piping it into the next command. So the output of this is the printed content of animals.csv. The printed content looks like this, right? So now what we're saying is take this output, which is the content of animals.csv, and pipe that into the head command. So what we're now saying is give us the top 5 lines of this file, is essentially in a nutshell what we're saying. Now remember, again, you're taking the output and piping it into the input. So now you have the top 5 lines of this file, and you're piping the top 5 lines of this file into the tail command. And here you're asking it to give you the bottom 3 lines of these 5 lines that you took. So it would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And now you're telling it, give me the bottom 3, right? That's the next bit of output. Now we're saying again, pipe this into the sort command. So you're piping the 3 lines. I don't know if this is now the right 3, but you're piping the 3 lines that you got from this output into this command. Now remember, we always said in the lesson yesterday that the sort command by default sorts alphanumerically. So it sorts 1 to 9 and then A to Z, right? But now what we're saying is sort basically in reverse order. So instead of sorting that way, we're now sorting Z to A, 9 to 1 is basically what it's saying. So sort in the opposite order, and then redirect that output, that final output, into a file called final.txt. So what's going to end up in this file is this 3 lines that we got here in reverse order. So it would be basically these 3 lines in reverse order would be in this final.txt. That is what they are kind of describing with these different chunks of code. So you've done quite a lot of things with just one line of code. And that is what they're also trying to demonstrate is the benefit of that. So every single time we do an exercise and we run a bit of code, we are constantly introducing usually new commands and new options. So I know that it can get confusing, and that is exactly why sometimes I opt to skip certain exercises so that we don't throw you guys off too much, and you can then feedback and come back and look at the more complex exercises. So if I do skip an exercise, sometimes it's because I'm also a bit concerned that it throws off your understanding, and I want to keep it, I want to keep everything a bit digestible for now. And we can always come back later on and do the more complex stuff. But I hope that this is clear-ish in terms of my explanation, Yantile. Okay. So what I'll do is I'll also demonstrate this now. So I'm going to switch to my terminal, and then Sorry, I just want to clear it quickly. Okay, so I just wanted to switch to my terminal so that I can also actually demonstrate this to you. Okay, so let me just change directory. And you can all also actually open your terminals now if you like and actually try and follow along with the example and see if you can replicate it on your end. It's always good to follow along so that if you do get any errors, you do have an opportunity to ask for some help and you can resolve that error and move forward. So let me give you a second, maybe open your shells now and try and follow along. Okay, so just to remind you, you need to navigate to your shell lesson data folder. For most of us, you'll be able to do a change directory desktop /shell lesson data. So you can go ahead and do that. I have to do something slightly different. So I will just have to do that quickly. And I think some of you might need to transcend another folder down to get to the shell lesson data. And then if we do a quick ls, see again, exercise and North Pacific Gyre. Okay, so the example says that the data that we want to work with sits inside exercise data and inside animal counts. Okay, so let's just do a quick ls to see what's there. Can we see this animals.csv file there? Perfect. So let's actually just do the first portion of the command, which is cat animals.csv, which just prints it to the screen, right? So that's exactly what we described before. So cat just prints to the screen. It's just printing out the contents of the file. And this is the contents of the file. So let's look at the contents. We've got a date. We've got a classification of an animal. And we've got a count. How many times they saw that animal. Okay, so now let's do the next portion of the command. So it's cat animals.csv, and we're piping that into head -n5. So let's see what happens. Okay, so we get the top 5 rows of the file. So that was the next portion. So now I'm going to use my up arrow to bring up the command I ran before. I did show you this yesterday, but it's very useful, especially when you're building up bits of scripts like this. Okay, so now we've seen that we extracted the top 5 lines of our file with the next bit of the command. Now we again piping these top 5 lines into the next bit of code, which is the tail -n3. And let's see what happens to the output now. Now you can see it's given us the bottom 3 lines of these 5 lines, right? So that's also what I tried to explain earlier. If I didn't explain it well, now you can sort of see it demonstrated here. Okay. So we've now got the bottom 3 lines of the top 5 lines. And we're now going to pass that to sort. So now what I'm going to do is I'm not going to add the -r yet. I'm just going to add sort. And then let's see how it sorts, okay? Okay, so we see that we've got raccoon, deer, rabbit, 566, 566, this all, okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add that -r option and let's see how it differs. Now we've got a rabbit at the top, deer, and the raccoon. Okay, because it swapped it around. So now we have 6 coming first. All of this is the same, but we have 6 first and then the 5. In terms of the date, here we had the 5 first and then the 6s, because obviously it reads from left to right. And so it's sorting based on the numbers first. So I hope that's not confusing, but it's basically just with the -r, sorted it in the reverse order. Okay, so now the next bit of code is piping this to a new file called final.txt. So now what it's piping is this sorted 3 lines into another file called final.txt. Okay. So now if we do an ls, we see final.txt. Let's do a cat on final.txt, and then we see those specific 3 lines. Okay, so that is essentially what this example has done. Hopefully you've been able to follow along a little bit on your own, but if you want to also just quickly type this in and see if you get to the same answer, then go ahead. I'll give you just a couple of minutes, and then I'll move on to this example over here. It's a really nice example, and I'll try and talk you through that as well. It's just the next example below the pipe reading comprehension. Yandile, go ahead.
Yes, what's the difference between cat and echo?
So when you start writing more complex codes, it's going to mean something slightly different, but within the context of how we are using it at the moment, it's kind of the same thing. So echo is also just printing something to the screen. Cat is also just printing something out to the screen.
All right, no problem.
I mean, I just typed in echo final text and it just writes final.txt on my screen. It doesn't actually print out the text file.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Sorry. Echo just prints back what you type right next to it. So if I do echo hello, oops, sorry, it will just print hello. If I do echo final.txt, it'll just print back final.txt. But if I do cat final.txt, it prints the contents of the file. Sorry, guys. My mind just did a big blurb there. Thanks, Sine.
Okay, no problem.
I played with echo yesterday. I was trying to append text to a text file and I tried to echo it, but it was easier to just go into the text file and do it because I tried to echo and then pipe. But yeah, so it's an interesting command when you start making it complicated.
So there are purposes for each, and it just depends on sometimes what you want to do in your script. So if I can think about a quick example, let's say you're writing up a bit of code, right? And somewhere in this code, you need to input something from a database. So maybe you've collected specific fields repetitively, maybe for different purposes, but now you've got this template that needs to pull in the correct cell for the correct like sample or something like that. And then that's when echo would work really, really well. So then you would just echo whatever's coming from the database into like that bit of code and then just repeat and repeat and repeat. So that's when echo becomes useful. But yeah, that's not really something we're going to discuss much today. And I don't know if that was really a good example, but yeah. But usually
I realize I have an example on hand, actually, if you don't mind me sharing. So
no, go ahead.
Like I said, I'm running on Linux, right? But my boyfriend set it up. Like, I don't actually know what I'm doing, right? Feminism. But one of the things we do is I can manually set the brightness of my screen much lower than like the GUI allows me. So then I go into like a little directory, and one of the commands in there is called brightness. So then I would say echo 200 and pipe it into the brightness command, and it makes my brightness 200 or whatever.
Exactly.
So it says, here is the actual number, pipe that into this command. So now I actually understand what I'm doing. Thank you. Feminism.
No, cool. So we might I'm just looking if we maybe do a couple of examples. I think we might actually do a couple of examples where we use echo for the loop section. So then we might be able to demonstrate when echo might be useful versus when cat might be useful. So I think we do 1 or 2 examples there. Yeah, so we'll run through a couple of examples there. So then we can try and demonstrate the utility, I guess, of echo. But cat is also very useful because cat, again, you can use within scripts when you want to pull information from, say, multiple documents. So say you've got a set of documents, 5 documents, and it maybe all contains different types of information or the same information for, say, different samples or whatever it might be that you're working on. Then you could use cat to actually print out all of that information into, for example, a separate file. And then that becomes useful, but echo is useful when you want to just print something into a specific place, like a variable, like Sane described. So that 200 was essentially like a variable that she echoed out that she could type in and so on. So then it becomes very useful, but we'll cover, I think, a couple of examples during loops, where we are actually gonna possibly use echo. I think we do have one example. I'll when we get there, I'll just double check for that. And then during shell scripts, we'll also be working with variables and so on, and then we can start to see when echo would become useful. I'm not sure if we have examples for both echo and cat, but we can see, and we can also maybe make up a couple of examples on the fly when we get there. So yeah, let's see if we can also address some of that. Okay, cool. So let's carry on for now. There was another example that we wanted to run through. It's also based on animals, this animals.csv file. So the example, I'm just going to type out what the example is as is, and then we're going to look at what it does, and then we're going to break it down after that, okay? So if you want to read through the example, you're welcome to, but I will work through it as well. And I'll read through the example too, so we're all on the same page about what they're asking us to do. So it's called pipe construction. So if you want to read through this yourself, you're also welcome to. But for the file animals.csv, so it's this one, they are saying consider the following command, and I'm going to type the command here. It's cut -d -f2 animals.csv. So this is the command, and they are just saying consider the following command. Then they go on to sort of explain what each component of this command does, and I'm going to explain it first and talk through it first, and then I'm going to run it, and we're going to look at the output. So just to refresh your memory, let's just print out animals.csv. That's what the whole file looks like. Okay. Cut -d. Didn't run this, so I can't use the up arrow. Animals.csv. Okay. So they go on to explain what each sort of portion of this command means. So I'll step through it exactly the way that they explain it. So they say that the cut command, which you haven't encountered before, so again, this is a new command, but the cut command is used to basically cut out a certain section of, for example, a line in a file. So they go on to say that cut expects the lines to be separated into columns by a tab. If you look at this, it's obviously not separated by tab. It's separated by a comma. So that's already one thing that we can notice here. But they mention that obviously there's a delimiter. So in this particular example, they use this option -d as a way to specify that the comma is the delimiter, and that is what they are doing here with the comma. So they are saying, cut the lines based on the delimiter, which is a comma. So what they've described is that typically cut would expect this to be tab separated, but you can tell cut that your files or your lines are not tab separated by specifying the -d option and then adding the comma. Okay. Then we see a -f flag or option. So the -f within this example tells us that we want to extract the second field or column. So what it's saying is separate this line, cut it by the comma, and then give me the second field. So in the second field is basically the name of the animal within this example. We said that we must cut it on field 2 by specifying 2 here. So it's just basically saying, give me just this from this file. Okay, so remember that in terms of the syntax, the argument always comes at the end, and the argument is what you wanted to run across. So let's just hit enter and let's see what happens. Okay, and it's done exactly what we expected it to do. It's cut up each line by comma and given us the second column or field. Okay, so I hope that that's kind of clear. I hope that there's no confusion with that. Are you all good on what this bit of code has done? The reason why I wanted to just quickly run through it is because we will encounter it within, I think, either the loops or the shell scripts lesson, but we will encounter it again. So I want to just be sure that you understand what it does before we go through it on that end. We might skip over it there if we don't have the time to do all of those examples, but just in case we've got the time, just want you to be sure that you're comfortable with it. So was that all clear? Just a quick thumbs up if it was.
It was definitely clearer than when I tried to read it on my own. So you've improved my understanding.
Okay, cool. No, that's great. As long as you guys understand what's happening here, because when we go forward, we might want to turn these into some variables in some of the upcoming scripts. So we'll see how we go. Okay. So there is another example on this page that is, it's not really too complex, but you're welcome to go through that on your own. I'm just looking at time and I'd just quickly like to go back to the whole NITheCS pipeline. So I'm just quickly going to stop sharing. I want to share the page where we first encountered NITheCS problem. Just to refresh your memory, I'm just going to go through it again. This is the first time we're really starting to address NITheCS problem with this pipes section here. So just to make sure that this doesn't sound like a bunch of gibberish at the moment, and to just link your conceptual understanding, through the lessons, I just thought I would run you through this sort of problem again. So what I'll do is I'll just read through it again, especially for those who might have missed it the last time. And then we'll go on to addressing at least the first portion, couple of the first bits of the problem. Okay. So they said that Nell Nemo is a marine biologist. She's just returned from a 6-month survey from the North Pacific Gyre. You'll remember the North Pacific Gyre folder from our shell lesson data. And they say she has been sampling gelatinous marine life in the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. She has 1,520 samples that she's run through an assay machine to measure the relative abundance of 300 proteins. She needs to run these 1,520 files through an imaginary program called goostats.sh that she's inherited. On top of this huge task, she has to write up the results by the end of the month so her paper can appear in a special issue of Aquatic Goo Letters. The bad news is that if she has to run goostats.sh by hand using a GUI, she'll have to select and open a file 1,520 times. If goostats.sh takes 30 seconds to run each file, the whole process will take more than 12 hours of Nell's attention. With the shell, Nell can instead assign her computer this mundane task while she focuses her attention on writing her paper. So they go on to say that the next few lessons throughout basically this Unix sort of lesson, they go on to say we'll explore ways that Nell can basically achieve this. And then they go on to say more specifically, she should be able to use a command shell to run the goostats.sh program using loops to automate some repetitive steps of entering file names so that a computer can work while she writes her paper. So basically, every sort of bit of the lesson for the Unix portion of things relate to this problem. You would have noticed that we've gone through navigating to a file and directory. That was one of the first things that they say Nell should have been able to do: navigate to a directory, create a file or directory, check the length of the file, and chain commands together. So we've done all of this already. We've navigated through our file systems and we learned a little bit about our file structure. We then did a bit of, making directories and creating files. So if you remember, we did nano and touch. Nano to create a text file, touch also to create a text file, but you can create an empty directory using touch. We did WC, the word count function, and we also did word count minus L quite a lot, which gives you the number of lines in a file, and we've done that. So we know how to do that. And now we've been on to chaining commands together with pipes, right? We'll move on to do some of these other things that she needs to do with the upcoming lessons today. So that is retrieving a set of files, iterating over a set of files, and running the shell script that contains her pipeline QStats, right? So that is where we're going to try to get to today. I hope we can get through all of that. If not, the website is here, like I've repeated over and over. But let's now get on to how we will address Nell's issue with the pipes and filter section. Just to again go back to what Nell has done. She's collected obviously a bunch of things from the North Pacific Gyre. And they've mentioned that Nell has run her samples through the same machines, and she's created now 17 files in her North Pacific Gyre directory. And as a quick check, they say that we should start from shell lesson data directory, and we can go into the North Pacific Gyre and can do a word count minus L. So remember, we're counting the number of lines, and this is a wildcard. We also learned about that yesterday. So we're counting the number of lines in all of the text files, essentially, that exists within North Pacific Gyre. Right. So what I want to do is I want to talk through what we need to do so that I'm sure that you're understanding it. And then I'm going to demonstrate what we need to do. Right. So for this portion of addressing Nell's problem, we're changing into North Pacific Gyre. We're doing a count of lines in each text file. And then you can see she's basically doing a numeric sort, pulling out the first few lines, looking at it, and so on and so on. So this is not a lot to do. So I'm going to demonstrate this and we'll step through this. But essentially, one of the first things that she's doing is, remember her problem. She needs to check lengths of a file, chain commands together, retrieve a set of files. We're not really there yet, but we're going to go through these now. But this is counting the lengths of the files that's sitting within her folder. So let's start with that. I'm just going to switch back to sharing my terminal. Let me just clear this quickly. Okay, and so the first thing I notice is I'm not in my correct directory. We were busy working with animal counts data just before this, which sits within our exercise data directory, but that's not where we're supposed to be. So we're supposed to be at least 2 levels up. And in North Pacific Gyre. So if we do a quick ls, we see these files that I just had demonstrated on the screen. So we see these text files, these 17 files or whatever it might be that Nell has created. And we also see the goostats.sh, right? That's the script file that she inherited. But now they tell us the first thing that we'll do is we'll do a word count minus L. So we're counting the number of lines in each text file. Okay, and it's printed that out to the screen for us. One thing you'll notice, and I'm not sure if you're noticing it, but there are some differences here. So we've got some files that end in an A, some files that end in a B, some files that end in a Z, and then the number of lines for each file. And we notice that there's one file where the number of lines is not the same as the rest. Okay, so those are the first couple of things we notice by just doing a count of the number of lines. Oops, sorry, my terminal has just disappeared. Okay. Now, let's pipe a few things together. Let's do a word count minus L. I'm going to use the up arrow instead so that it saves me time to type and possibilities of errors. I'm going to pipe that into the sort minus n. So that means sort numerically in this instance. And then head minus n 5. So give me the top 5 lines after it's been sorted. And we're sorting numerically. So let's see what it does. Okay, so now it's shifted 240 to the top because we've sorted it numerically now. And it's just printed out the top 5 lines. So now we can very clearly see that there's one file that is different to the rest. Okay, that was one of the first things that we've done. Now, let's see if we use perhaps say the tail command instead. Well, I think we can all see what we might have gotten, but now instead of tail, let's do tail minus n5. You can see the bottom 5 rows. If you had known how many files you had and how many rows you should have had in total, something like this could have been a nice little command for you to use to just see, hey, does this total match what I should have? And you can immediately see that there's, for example, a problem. So this is just a bit of like inspecting some very, very basic files. So I mentioned before that some files have a Z at the end, but somewhere along the line, we had learned, I'm not sure if we'll remember this, but somewhere along the line, they had mentioned that null labeled all of the files with either an A or B at the end. So a Z tells us that there could be something wrong with that particular file. In the example, they go on to explain that all of the samples here should be marked with an A or B, and her lab uses a Z to indicate samples with missing information. So what we know then from this is that all the samples with a Z at the end contain missing information. So let's say we want to remove these sets of samples with a Z at the end because obviously there's something wrong with it. She maybe can't go back and recollect data for that particular sample. So these samples would need to be removed. But firstly, you maybe want to see just how many samples have missing data. Now you could maybe do an LS, for example, just using a wildcard again. And remember, because all of the samples that she's looking for should end in a Z, we can just do the wildcard in front, which would match anything in the front. And anything that ends in a Z.txt would be matched. So we see that there are 2 files actually, right? There are 2 files with the Z at the end. So those are possibly 2 files that null might want to remove now. Okay. So this is just a bit of digging through a little quick data set. Throughout the next couple of examples, we're going to basically dive deeper into how she would perform some of the other activities that they outline in the problem. So how would she loop over a data set, make a little shell script, edit shell scripts, and so on. So we're going to cover a little bit of that, and let's see how far we get as well. So I'm not sure if you might want to just take a quick 5-minute break here, maybe just stretch your legs before we start with loops. Or if you are comfortable for me to just carry on. So maybe just type in the chat if you want a 5-minute break or if you're happy to carry on. Quick stretch? Okay, sure. Let's take a very, very quick 5-minute break then. And then we'll carry on. So what is the time now? 9:20? Okay, perfect. So 9:25, we're back. Also just, thanks, Nikita. I also just grabbed a quick cup of coffee. So now we're going to move on to talking about loops. There are only 3 episodes of this particular lesson left. So we've got loops, shell scripts, and finding things that we still have to complete. So let's start off with loops. I just quickly want to share my screen with the the lesson. Just so I can talk you through sort of what the goals, of course, of the lesson are. So one of the key things about loops is that it allows you to iterate a set of commands across a list. So you're basically kind of trying to answer the question of how can I perform the same action on many different files over and over and over again. And what we hope to accomplish by the end of this particular portion of the lesson is to write a loop that applies one or maybe more commands. It can be a set of commands separately to each file in a set of files. We want to perhaps trace the values taken on by a loop variable during execution of a loop. So we'll talk about variables and how you can start to introduce variables. And we'll kind of touch on the differences between a variable's name and its value. We'll talk about the use of spaces. We did talk a little bit about naming conventions yesterday, if you recall. I mentioned that you don't really want to have spaces in your names and so on, but inevitably you will come across files, maybe not your own, but somebody else's who does have spaces. And so we'll talk about how to handle that within a loop, especially when you're pulling in variables and you're not sure what those variables might be structured like, the names at least. So we'll talk a bit about how to control for that. And we'll run a loop or two. Okay, so I'll step you through some of the introductory content and background for loops, and then I'll just talk to you about the basic structure of a loop. And then we'll actually start to write our first for loop, and we'll see what it does. We'll see how the command line reacts, and we'll get you to do this as well. And then we'll run a couple of loops with a few different examples to give you an idea of the functionality. But for those of you that are from a bit of a coding or programming background already, it does not work any differently to any other for loop in any other programming languages. Okay. So they start by saying that loops are a programming construct which allow us to repeat a command or a set of command for each item in a list. So we did basically touch on that just now. They also go on to say that they are key. Loops essentially are key to productivity improvements because it allows for a lot of automation, and we'll see that and demonstrate that in a second. You can also think of them as similar to wildcards and tab completion, in that using loops reduces the amount of typing that you have to do, and it then also reduces the number of mistakes you might make. Because if you have to repeat things over and over and over, it is more likely that you're going to introduce some errors, whereas loops and also things like wildcards and tab completion, they all limit that amount of human error that you can introduce from your end. Now they paint a scenario here and they say, suppose we have several hundred genome data files. So yeah, I know all the examples that we've used so far have been very tailored to the life sciences, but that's just down to, I think, who created the original lesson. So if these examples don't cater to you as physicists too well, I hope that it's still okay for us to be using a lot of these examples and that it doesn't, impact your understanding of anything. But yeah, let's just go through the example. At the end of the day, it's more the commands and everything that you're learning that's important. But suppose we have several hundred genome data files named basilisk.dat, minotaur.dat, and unicorn.dat. For this example, we'll use the exercise data creatures directory, which only has 3 example files, but the principles can be applied to many, many more files at once. So they go on to say that the structure of each of these files is the same. It's got the common name, the classification, and updated date. These are all present on the first 3 lines of each of these files, with the DNA sequences following on that. So the first 3 lines contain information about what's in that file, and then the next few lines are the actual genome sequence data, basically. Okay, so I'm going to, before I switch to looking at these files, talk through the structure of a for loop. I'm then going to switch to the files. We can look at the files and then actually run a little for loop. But I thought maybe we could just go over the syntax of a for loop first, just to see sort of what the syntax is. Maybe it might not be too digestible yet, and then we'll do an example. But essentially, if you are familiar with programming, this is going to be very clear to you. But if you're not, it can be complex. And I have found people sometimes struggle with this. But if you're stuck with how I explain it right now, maybe just give us a second to get through some of the examples, and then maybe it will help your understanding. But essentially, the structure is you always start off a for loop with a for. This will tell the shell basically that you're about to write the loop. You have to specify a variable and then a list. So for something in a list of somethings, do this. So it's saying for this in a list of things. So for each thing in this list of things, run this command, and then you end the loop by saying done. So the key components are for, do, and done. So for something in a list of some things, do this command, done. So that's just basic structure. And I'm going to show you how to apply it now, basically with this first little for loop that we'll run, and we'll see what happens. It tells you here what the output's going to be, but let's step through it bit by bit. So I'm going to just switch to sharing my terminal again. Let me also just check where I am at the moment. So they have said that we should be in exercise data, if I remember correctly. Okay. They've said exercise data creatures directory. So we should be able to just move one level up, and we see the exercise data there. So let's change directory into exercise data. Let's do a quick ls. Okay, so there we see the creatures subdirectory, which is what they said we would be working with. So let's actually just get into that subdirectory. And let's see what's there. Okay, perfect. We see the three files that they've mentioned: basilisk.dat, minotaur.dat, and unicorn.dat. So let me first just give you all a second to navigate there. So we're going back to exercise data, into creatures. And then you can just do an ls to make sure you're in the right place, and you should see these three files. So just take a second to just quickly navigate there. And then we'll begin writing our first for loop. Okay. So let's write this for loop. So the first thing we said is that a for loop always starts with for. We have to specify a variable. In this case, it's going to be file name in a list of things. So I'm just going to list this list of file names here. Okay, and you can do the same. So for file name in, and I've given the list of file names. And now when I click enter, let's see what happens. See, now it has changed from $1 to a larger than sign. Remember before, larger than sign redirected outputs into another file. In this case, it is signaling that the shell is waiting for you to complete this loop, basically. So you need to complete this and then enter done. Remember, done closes the loop, and then the shell will know you've completed everything you want to enter there and you're ready to run the loop. Okay, but you see here that it's first now changed its prompt. So we need to tell it what it needs to do with the set of files. Okay, so now we're going to say do, so that it knows this is now what it needs to run and loop over. So we'll do head minus n2 dollar file name, and I'm going to speak to what each of this means in just a second. Minus n1. And then you're going to do done. And then this is going to execute the command when I click enter this time. So let me just run through what we've entered here. So we're telling it to run these two commands across each of the files that are named in this list is essentially what we are telling to do. So we're telling it, take the top two lines of each of these files, okay? Then pipe that into the tail command and get the last line in the top two lines. So basically you're pulling out the second line. So it's a very convoluted way to do things, but that is essentially what you're doing. And then you're saying done. So then it knows it needs to finish it for Basilisk, for example, then loop back into Minotaur, then loop back into Unicorn, and then the list ends, and then that's actually done. It's looped over the whole list, and the for loop has completed. So if I click enter now, you will see that what it's done is it's printed the second row of each of the files. So if we just do say head minus N5 on Basilisk dot that, you can see that the classification which is printed there is actually the second line. So basically what we've managed to do with this particular script is pull out the classification of each of these files into a single set. So you could even have rerouted this into another file that just has all of the classifications of, for example, all your files. So the utility of this is actually quite great. But you can see here that if you look at the file, you've got the common name, the classification, the updated date, which they described earlier, if you recall, and then it's got the genomic sequence data. So essentially, this script pulls out the classification from each file in the list of files that you give it. And this list could have been a list of 1,000 files. And that is what's great. It would have just kept running and kept running and kept running until it was done. And so that is kind of the gist of how a for loop works. So at this point, is there any confusion? Do you get the sort of gist of what it does, or are you still struggling? We will go through quite a number of other examples that will demonstrate different components of the for loop and how it can change if you do certain things in certain ways. So maybe that might also help with understanding a little bit. But that essentially is how the for loop behaves. We're going to speak about why we've put this $sign here, for example, how it might influence the script. We're going to talk about that in a second. But for now, just in terms of the basic sort of semantics, you understand how the for loop works, or is there something I can explain better? Does it loop line by line? So when you say line by line, could you clarify what you mean? Do you mean when it loops, does it loop line by line like this? Oswald, you can also go ahead while we wait for Maurice to type the reply.
Good morning. So just wanted to know if let's assume that I don't know how many folders I do have in my directory. So can I use the wildcard just after file name in? Then I use the wildcard, which is the asterisk. Then I say dot. Then after the DAT, can I able to use that?
Yes, so we're going to cover a couple of examples where we do start to introduce wildcards, where it will just take any number of files that exists within a directory. So we're going to do a couple of those examples in just a second. So then we'll demonstrate how to do that. But yes, in theory, you can do that. And that is also kind of how we can start to put together all these different chunks of things that we've obviously learned now, adding wildcards into the for loop, then having your scripts, which can be piped. Your scripts can be as complex as you know how to put together, and that as works. So it doesn't have to be one command. It can be a set of commands that sits within this portion, for example. So you can tell it to even do a set of things to all of these files, and so on and so on. You can write a lot of complex loops and scripts, and you can do a loop within a loop, nested loops. We're not going to touch on that too much today, but it can get very complex actually. But for today's purposes, we just want you to understand the basics. But what you've described right now, Oswald, is really where for loops will become powerful and where shell scripts become powerful. So I don't want to jump the gun now and confuse anybody. So let me stop there. Just know that we're gonna work our way there to get to those examples. Some of them are gonna come up very quickly, actually. Others will come up when we do shell scripts. So hopefully by the end of today's lesson, then lots of those questions will be answered. So I just want to come back to Maurice's question. Maurice is asking, does it loop line by line when it goes through your files? So I'm not sure what you mean line by line when you go through the files. I'm going to try to just explain maybe again what it's doing. So firstly, what it's doing is it's looping across your actual files, because we've specified 3 sets of files here. And we're saying for each of these files, we're specifying that here, for each of these files, because this file name is essentially a variable. And this variable is each of these file names. One of these file names is being pulled here at a time because it's a variable. So what it's saying is loop across each file, and we've specified that here. Give us the top 2 lines, then pipe that into the tail command and give us the bottom 1 line. And then close. Then loop back and go to minotaur.dat, do the same thing. So basically, basilisk would have been here first. It would loop around. The script would replace this with minotaur. That would go there. And then it would run this command again, finish, loop around again, go to unicorn.dat. You can imagine, just conceptually imagine that this now becomes unicorn.dat. It runs this command again. So it takes the top 2 lines, pipes it and gets the bottom line, which is the second line, and then loops again. But now this time there's no other file for it to loop across. So it's now finished and it's printed out the result. Yeah. Okay, cool. I'm glad. Sometimes it does take a bit of time to understand it as well. So if it's not like 100% clear, don't worry. Hopefully we can clear it up a little bit as we progress with the rest of the examples. I just want to make sure that in terms of just my background explanations, I haven't missed anything important. I think we've managed to cover everything. The one thing that I haven't demonstrated is that we have done this across multiple lines in this example. We could have written this entire for loop in 1 line. And actually, if I press up, because I did execute the for loop before, you can actually see that it prints out in 1 line. And what you'll notice is the breaks that you see here are demarcated here with a semicolon. So you could actually, in theory, have written this whole command in 1 line. And then also when you want to edit the command, you can come here, make some edits, and then just hit enter and actually rerun the for loop. So that's, again, use your up and down arrows so that you don't have to retype your commands and your scripts over and over and over. I think that was the one thing I haven't showed you yet. But again, we're going to do a few things where we're going to try and edit a few things and so on. So we'll work and play around with this a lot more in just a second. But now here is something that's might throw you off a little bit. But let's see, let's hope that it doesn't. Okay. So I'm just going to remove this for now. I don't think I'm going to need to run this again. But I just want to show you the whole concept of using a variable. So just see something here. Done something funny. I just want to write this out again because I just want to demonstrate something to you quickly. Before we go on with the rest of the examples. Okay. So let's say we wanted to change what we've got here. So this is file name. Let's say we wanted to make this an X. Do you think this loop, without changing anything else, would still run? Yes, no? Would this loop still work the way we expect it to work? No. Okay, so why do you say no?
Your loop's going to look for X, right? It's for every X, do something to X, but there's no X that reappears. Right?
Yes and no. So Yandile, yes, you're right. You have to also match it to the file name. Here's the interesting thing though. I'm going to show you something now. Let's actually leave it file name first and let's see what happens, because obviously it's not going to work, but let's see what it returns. It's done something actually completely different now. Okay. It has done something, but it's not done what we've wanted it to do. Now, let's add X here where we've got the $sign. Now it's actually pulled out the right line and it's actually done what we wanted it to do. So what I wanted to demonstrate here is that really X can be anything. Your variable is just a variable. It works as a variable. So this would have been temperature, which is actually not related to anything here at all. And you could have changed this variable over here to temperature as well. And it would have ran perfectly fine. This variable is a placeholder, but you must also remember to call the right variable over here. So this $sign here, again, remember when we are over here, the dollar indicates the prompt, but here, the dollar indicates the variable. Okay, so this is what tells the shell that this is the variable that you are using. And in essence, that variable can be anything. It doesn't matter what you call it, whether we call it temperature, it functions the same way, as long as the script knows what to call. So you are saying, for example, for this variable in this list, doesn't matter what you call this variable, it's going to loop over this list anyway. You're doing this, and this dollar, what this means is it's pulling in one variable at a time. So it's pulling in one of these list names at a time. In this case, the names are a file, and we're running a command across a file. So the thing I wanted to demonstrate here is just that the variable can be anything. And the shell understands what it is within the context of a loop like this. When you have the $sign there, it knows that you're actually calling a variable. And if that variable doesn't really match what you've put in the rest of the for loop, you can have some funky things happening. So that's all I wanted you to see, is that the variable can be anything, but the way you use it in the for loop does matter, and it is quite important. Regardless of what the variable is, the loop will still function the same way. It will still work the same way. But you just have to use it correctly within the sort of structure of the for loop. In this particular example, the X, the temperature, anything, it could have been absolutely any name or letter, and it would have functioned the same way. But when we write scripts, it's always important to think about somebody who's going to use that scripts downstream. A lot of the times we're using scripts that other people will use, other people will try and, rerun your scripts. And if you've got funky variable names that doesn't relate to the data, it's going to make that person's life a living nightmare. So the other important thing to bring across here is just what you call your variables. Although it doesn't matter, it does matter to the person on the other end. So if I had said temperature here, but I'm actually using genomic data and I'm looping across file names, this wouldn't make any sense if somebody picked this up downstream. They would automatically assume that maybe this for loop might have something to do with temperature or temperature data, it already sets the person off on the wrong path conceptually. So that is the other thing we wanted to demonstrate here. We'll talk about this a little bit more when we do shell scripts and how you can add comments to your script so that people who use it downstream know exactly what you're talking about, and what the script does. So we will get to that. But again, maybe by working through a few more examples, some of this will also become a little bit more clear. So I want us to do maybe just 2 of the examples. Let me see how much time we have. Yeah, let's do at least 2 of the examples. Let's do an easier one and then one that's a little bit more tricky. We'll work through that. And then I'll see if I can do maybe one of the other more complex ones before we carry on with the rest of the lesson. I'm just very conscious of time. So yeah, I'm just choosing a couple exercises quickly. Yeah, sure, go ahead, Yandile.
Did you ever explain the $sign? I don't think I understand what's happening there.
So you can think of the $sign as a variable. How can I say? It's basically just indicating that it's a variable. I'm trying to think of a better way to explain it quickly. So it's basically like it's telling the shell that you're calling the variable. Does that make a bit more sense?
Okay, yeah, I get that.
So remember, you specified the variable in the top section of the loop. So here where you go, let's maybe not use temperature. Let's do the X here. So where you go for X in basilisk, blah, 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 you have specified here that X is your variable. While X can be anything, you've specified here that X is the variable, right? And your variables are each item in this list. So what you're doing in this for loop is the for loop knows that when the dollar exists within the for loop, that it's calling a variable. So here you're calling the variable X. So essentially what it's doing is it's saying for basilisk dot dat, do this, done, loop over. Then for minotaur dot dat, do this, done, loop over. Do you get that? Is that,
so does it matter where you put it?
What do you mean does it matter?
$X?
It will matter because if I put the $X in front of the head, that doesn't make sense, right? Because the command comes first, then the option, then what you want to operate it on.
Okay.
So let's look at this. Let's look at demonstrating it here because maybe in one line it's a bit confusing to understand. So let's separate it out here. Here in this example, we separated it out, right? We've got for, and we specify the variable. We specify the list that we want the for loop to loop over, right? Then we're saying do, which tells the shell that you're going to basically put in the commands that you want the loop to run. So this is the command. So let's forget about how it looks here. Let's just look at this command, okay? We've got head minus $2 file name, which means that the file name will be inserted here when the loop runs. The file name is basilisk.dat.
Okay.
Do you understand why now
I see
yes,
now.
it matters? Yeah, okay. So if that $file name was in front of head, the command line won't know what's happening, right? Because it's expecting the command first, then the option, then what it operates on.
Right, yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, cool. Maybe it will become a bit more clear when we do a few more examples, but I hope that even if you're kind of understanding it, you kind of get what I'm saying.
I see.
Okay, so let's do a couple of examples and then let's demonstrate this a little bit more. And let's see if maybe it also improves everybody's understanding just a little bit. So the first example that they give, or rather not example, but the first exercise that they give on the page is, how would you write a loop that echoes numbers 0 to 10? So you just need to print the numbers 0 to 10, 0 to 9, not 0 to 10, 0 to 9 onto the screen. how would you go about, or how do you think you would go about writing a loop to do that? So let's think about this strategically. We want to just print. Okay, this is not part of the loop. I'm just typing it so that you can see it. So we want to print the numbers 0 to 9, but using a for loop. So let's do this iteratively. I'll do this example with you. And then the next example, I'm going to let you do by yourself, and then you can feedback, and then we can talk about it. Okay. So we remember we always start by starting our for loop with the word for. The shell will know how to then
Sorry to
interpret.
disturb.
Yeah.
Is there a like range command?
Range?
for-
What do you mean by that?
A range like ranging from 0 to 10? Can you use that?
Yes, but let's not go there now, because that's going to take you down another path. For now, I'm going to do it in a very simple way. And we're going to talk about how you can pull in a list that you maybe have somewhere else soon. Don't worry, we'll get there, when you can refer
Okay.
to a list or a range or so on. Let's first just step through it in a very, very straightforward way. This way that I'm going to demonstrate now is a bit clunky, but it's the way that the Carpentries have demonstrated it, and it's done this way for a reason. So let's just follow along the way that they demonstrated, and we'll get to how to pull variables in from other sets of files, from other sheets, and so on and so on. So we'll get to that, but let's just step through this example quickly. So they are saying for, I'm going to call it X, in, remember, it's you specify your variable. The variable I'm specifying is X. Then you must specify your list. So we're not at the point yet where we are doing anything fancy with our lists yet. We're going to get there. But so for now, my list is just the numbers. So this is going to seem clunky, but let's just step through it like this first, just so that we are sure we don't lose anybody in terms of conceptual understanding. Okay. So we start by saying for variable in a list of things. In this case, it's just the list of numbers that I am sending. It now knows that it's a loop. And I'm going to say, do the following commands. I'm going to echo $X. And now you see I'm using $X here. So what is it going to do? It's going to echo 0, echo 1, echo 2, echo 3, so on and so on. So I think it's going to do what I wanted to do. And I'm going to hit done. And it's done that. It's echoed that back to the screen. Simple, right? At least in this context for now, that is fairly simple. I hope everybody understood what's happened there. Now we're going to do something a bit different. We're going to start adding some wildcards and pulling in things from elsewhere, okay? So I'm going to step us once again through the examples that the Carpentries give. The intention of this exercise is for you to see what's going to happen when you kind of play around with these variables and how you structure the for loop, and then what the outputs look like. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to demonstrate each for loop, and we're going to look at the outputs, and then we're going to chat about why that has happened. And this might also kind of reiterate your understanding of using variables. And with this example, we're also going to be introducing a wildcard now. So that really tells you that we'll be pulling in an unspecified set of files. Okay, so let's just go through the example, and then we'll talk about why the outputs look so different, because it's going to look like we're doing kind of the same thing, but we're not really doing the same thing. But let's do the first example. So for data file, specifying my variable in. Okay, I've just realized that we're using the PDB files, so I'm not in the right directory. Sorry, guys. I think we need to navigate back to exercise data. So let's just go one level up so that we can pull in those PDB files that we were working with yesterday. Let's just go one level up. Let's check where we are. So remember yesterday, actually, we worked a lot with this proteins directory. So we're going to change directory into the proteins directory. Sorry. Okay, and sorry about that. You'll see the files that we worked on yesterday. You will recall there are a couple of files here that obviously we created yesterday. All these text files were things we did as part of our exercises yesterday, but we are focusing on these PDP files. But you can see that there's actually already a range of files in this folder. So we are gonna ask this for loop that we're writing now to pull in these PDP files and do something with it. Okay, so we're just going to start by writing our for loop now. So it's for data file in star.pdp. So remember, the wildcard is saying match anything that ends in .pdp. So it's actually going to pull in all these PDP files. So already we know this loop is going to loop across all of these .pdp files. Then we need to tell it what to do. And within this example, we're going to tell it to list .pdp files and then done. So what do you think is going to happen when we actually execute this command? So have a think through what you think might happen. You can take a guess as well, because I'm going to show you a slightly different example right after this, and we're going to look at why the outputs change. But I just want to see, what do you think is going to come out of this when I run this? So we are saying for each of the data files in star.pdp, do ls.pdp. Okay, so Antile is saying a list of files ending in .pdp. That is correct, but not 100% correct, but you're thinking in the right way, definitely. Over and over, yeah. So you're going to get something printed over and over and over. Let's hit enter, and then before we talk through the output, I'm going to do the second example and hit enter again, and we can compare, okay, what happens when we are changing the scripts a little bit. So we're going to introduce the use of the variable after this. So you'll notice here, we are not using a variable. I'm not sure if you picked that up. We haven't specified or called a variable. Within the loop, we've just said wildcard again .pdp. So we're telling it to list everything .pdp, but we are also telling it loop over. So when we hit enter now, it's going to loop over multiple times and print the same thing multiple times, right? So this is actually a loop gone a little bit wonky. It's maybe done what you wanted it to do, but not at all the way you wanted it to do it. So now let's take a look at the second example that they give us where we introduce a variable, and let's see how this changes now. So for data file in star.pdp, we're now going to say do ls, but this time we're going to say $data file, right? So we're now no longer saying wildcard call all the BDP files. We're now saying call the variable. And then we're going to say done. Remember, you must always finish with done. The shell knows you're done entering your commands now. Now you're going to hit enter. Now look at how the output has changed. Now it has just printed each PDP file. Here it printed each PDP file in one row over and over and over. Okay. So who can tell me why it has done that? What is the key difference here? Anyone? Okay, well, let's think about it a little bit. This portion of the script across both of these two examples are exactly the same. The one bit of the script that changes is the actual bit of script that runs, the actual command that we want to have loop over the file. So remember, the for loop is a loop. It will loop over. And essentially what we're telling it here is a loop over each PDP file. So it's looping over until it finishes and it sees no more files to loop over. But in this example, it's doing the same thing with every loop, which is that we've asked it to list, again, all the PDP files. So it's looping over all the PDP files, but every time it loops over, it's listing all the PDP files. So in this case, you have this list of listings, and it's gone a bit wonky. What we've done here is called the variable. So what changes here is that this expands to cubane, ethane, methane, octane, pentane, propane, but we've called it only once here. So each variable just gets called once here. So it will loop, it will start with cubane, it will then list cubane, right? It will loop over ethane, it will list ethane, because that's what we've specifically told it to do. Whereas here we've told it list everything again, loop over, list everything again. So what we want you to understand here is just the utility of variables and how powerful it can be, and how not using them as well can actually have your scripts function in ways that you might not want it to function. Is there any confusion with that at this point? Is that clear? Do you understand what I've tried to demonstrate? Okay, I'm seeing a few thumbs up. So I hope that that's okay. So I'll continue on for now then. Okay, perfect. So let's continue on and do one more. Let me see if I want to do one more, 2 examples. Okay, let's do 2 more examples of loops. But this time we're going to enter a couple of additional commands and we're going to do a couple of additional things. So it's going to be more complex scripts that will run within the loop. So I'll just do, I think I'm just going to do 2 of the easier examples for now, and then I'm going to run on with the rest of the lesson. If we've got time, I can always circle back to some of the more complex examples, but I just want to be sure we get through the lesson content for today. So I'm going to do an example where we've got a couple of additional commands in the file, and we actually also try to reroute the output into another file. So we're going to do a redirect. So remember, redirects, we use the greater than symbol to redirect into a file. So we're going to try and do that within a for loop as well. So I'm going to type out the example again that they give, and we're going to look at what it does. Before I hit enter, we're going to talk through it and we're going to try and determine what it does already, and then we'll see if we are correct. So for alkanes, in again star.pdp. So we're using the same PDP files, but we're specifying the variable. The variable we are calling alkanes. Again, alkanes could be X, it could be anything. So for alkanes in star.pdp, do tell them this is now the commands that need to be run. We're now going to say echo $alkanes. Remember echo. What's echo going to do if we say echo $alkanes? We discussed this earlier today. Okay, so what echo is going to do in this context, remember it's going to pull in each variable. So it's just going to print each file name, in this case, back to us on the screen, right? But this time, we're not going to say done. We're going to have another command that we want to run. This time we're doing cat $alkanes. So remember, cat is now printing out the content of this document, or the content of alkanes, and we are redirecting that into a file called alkanes.pdp. And now we're going to say done. Right. So now what do you think is going to happen in this case? what will happen when we hit enter now?
So the echo will print out those names, right? For
Mhm.
each variable. The cat, each time we loop over it, it now pushes that into this new little file we've made, but we have a single pipe, right? So it's going to replace it every time. So I think we're only going to have the very last one actually get, like if we open that file that we've created, only the last one will appear there, right?
100%. That's exactly what's going to happen. So I'm going to hit enter. Okay. And you can see that it's printed each one out to the screen, each of the files that it's looped over, because we've asked it to do that. Okay. We said echo $alkane. So echo back whatever is in this variable. The variable is obviously going to be just the name of the file. It's a wildcard. So the wildcard will expand to include cubane, ethane, methane, octane, pentane, and propane. And that's exactly what it's done. It's expanded. And it's firstly echoed this to the screen, right? What it now does, and this is the interesting bit, is you're saying cat $alkynes. So that's still this variable. And you're saying put that into alkanes.pdp. So actually the only thing that's putting into alkane.pdp are the names of the files, not the contents of the files, even though we said cat here. So this case, cat is not actually reading the contents of the files anymore. It's reading the file name and it's putting it into alkanes.pdp and it's saying done. So now, let me just see if it will open. Okay, so sorry. I keep mixing up echo and cat. Sorry, guys. Cat is actually taking the content of the file and redirecting it into a file called alkanes.pdp. The only thing that's different here is that once it's done that, it's overwriting it every single time because we've got the single greater than sign. So that's what Sine was describing. So what's actually being captured is just the outputs of propane. We don't, I think, let me see if it shows. Yeah, so we only have the outputs of propane captured here. We don't have the outputs of cubane, ethane, methane, octane, and pentane, which you would maybe have wanted here. So maybe for this for loop, you wanted to loop it over all of these .pdp files and maybe put all of the contents of all the files into one big file, like one master file. So that might have been your intention here, but because you use the singular greater than sign, what it's done is it's overwritten what's in this file every single time. So I don't know if you can recall, but yesterday we ran an example like this, where we used the greater than sign, and I think we said echo hello, or something like that. When we used the singular greater than sign, it just echoed hello once then in the final file because it was overwriting the whole time. But when we had a double greater than sign here, it appended, right? So that is the key thing that we did wrong here. If we wanted all of these files information in one .pdp file, we actually needed to have the double greater than sign here, and it would have appended, and then you would have had cubane, ethane, methane, octane, pentane, and propane. So what we've done here is just echoed back to the screen the names of the files that we wanted to, the contents we wanted to push to alkanes, but that didn't happen. The only content that pushed was propane. But now, if we had done this slightly differently, and we had said, let's make this a double greater than sign, which would now tell it to append. And let's see if we can make this a different file name. So let's make this all.pdp. So we want everything in one. Now, if we look at, okay, it might be very long now, but now if we look at all.pdp, we should now have everything in one file. Ooh, let me just see here. Everything in one file. So before, when we ran it and we did a cat, we only had propane. But now when we ran it the second time, we've got everything from cubane all the way to propane. So it's actually appended. So the thing that we wanted to demonstrate here is that, again, the for loop is doing exactly what you're telling it to do. So you have to be very careful what you're telling it to do. In this particular example, we had overwritten the output every single time we redirected to the file. So every time we did a cat for the file, we overwrote what we actually put there. But the second time we ran it, the second time we ran it, we concatenated all the data into a new file now called all.pdp. So if we did an ls, let me just do an ls here quickly. You will now see the alkanes.pdp, which is the wrong file that didn't really go to plan. And then we've got all.pdp, which is the correct file. Now we've appended everything and now we've got everything in one file. So this is also beneficial because there'll be lots of times when you need to combine data sets and pull them together in this way, where you have to append and concatenate a lot of data sets because perhaps you need everything in one singular file. You know, after this, you can then say, okay, pull out column 5 out of all of these files, and then I'll do some data analysis on that later on. So it's very useful. What for loops are used for is very useful, but it is very easy to miss something and then, you know, go a bit wonky with what you do in terms of the for loop. So I want to just stop there with the exercises quickly and just go back to the main lesson. And in order to do that, we'll have to switch back to the creatures directory. I'm hoping to just get through this content within the next 20 or 30 minutes or so that we can take a quick break and have time to still cover a bit of shell scripts. So I'm going to speed up just a little bit, if that's okay, because I think we've covered the foundation. But we're going to do some other for loop examples again now, and just kind of work through Nell's problem again towards the end. So I'd like us to do that, at least work through that problem for processing files. And then let me just see if there is something else that I'd need to cover here. Okay, no, I think we are good. I think we can make it through this in the next 20 or 30 minutes. So let's see how we go. Okay. So the first thing we have to do now is we have to switch back to our exercise directory. So we just have to move one level up. Just making sure that we are where we want to be and we are in the exercise directory. Sorry. Okay. So earlier, if you can recall, we were busy working in the creatures directory. It had the basilisk .dat, minotaur, .dat, etc., etc. So we're going to change directory back into the creatures directory to get back to the main lesson. So we've actually worked through a few of the examples that were on the site just now, but we're going to get back to the lesson, and we're going to see how far we can get with this before we need to move on to the shell scripts. I would like us to take a break soon because I think we've been on the call quite a long time. I think a break is due, but let's just do a little bit more before we take that break. Try and keep time. Okay. So let's just do a quick ls to remind ourselves what's in this file. So we've got basilisk.dat, minotaur.dat, unicorn.dat. So we're going to write a loop that does something with these files again. So I'm not sure if earlier you can remember we did a little like line count. We used a wildcard, and it printed out some number of lines for some files. So I've just done this here again. So you can see here we've got 163 lines in each file here, total of 489 lines. So this is not very different to the example we did just earlier. So now what we want to do is extract a portion of these lines. So we don't maybe want all of these lines. We know that, say, our data of interest sits on a particular section of each file, and for each file we want to pull out just those bits of data, just as an example. So how would you go about doing that? So they've demonstrated an example on their lessons, and so I'm just going to go through the example that they demonstrate, and then I'm going to speak through it as well. So for file name, so file name is your variable, okay, can be anything. And we're using a wildcard here as well. So we're saying for all the files that end in .dat, so that's going to be these 3 files. We're going to say do. So what do we want it to do? We're going to echo the file name. So basically, we're going to echo each of these. So you'll see basilisk.dat, minotaur.dat, unicorn.dat, just the same way it's happened in the previous example. And now we're going to again do an extra bit of code here. And we're going to again say, give me the head. But this time we're asking for the first 100 lines. And we're calling the variable $file name. So give me the first 100 lines of each of these files. Then pipe that to tail minus n 20. So now saying we want the last 20 lines of these 100 lines. And then, then done. Done. We close it. Now let's see what happens. Ooh, it's printed out a lot of stuff to the screen. But what it's essentially done is printed lines 81 to 100, if I'm not mistaken. So it's taken the top 100 lines and then printed the bottom 20 lines of that 100 lines. So that would be 80 to 100. Please tell me if my math is incorrect. But that's essentially what we've done here, is printed that chunk of lines for each data file. And so that's obviously just genomic sequence data. So we've printed a particular portion of the genome essentially here for each file, or for each animal, if we can think of each file as representing the genome of an animal. In the life sciences, this is very, very useful. I'm not sure if this group might see the utility of it, but in the life sciences, this is very useful. We often need to specify specific gene sets or something that maybe exists within a genome and pull out that chunk of information. But similarly, I would suspect that you might have files where you need to subset it in some way, and this is a cool way to subset some of those files from directly within the command line. Okay, so I don't think this was too complicated to understand. I think that was fairly straightforward. We've run through a very similar example just before this. So I don't think that this was too complex. You can let me know if I'm wrong. I'm not seeing any issues coming up in the chat or anybody raising their hand. So I'm just going to carry on for the time being. Right at the beginning of the lesson today, when I was outlining what we were going to cover today, I mentioned something about learning how to work with file names that have, for example, spaces. So yesterday we said that when we set up our files, naming conventions obviously matter. We spoke about not adding any special characters that the shell recognizes as something into your file names, because that could break scripts or make it do things you don't want it to do. The other thing we did very specifically state is that when you are working on the shell, you don't want to have any spaces in your file names, because the shell is going to interpret those things differently. But inevitably, when you work, for example, with someone else's data, most of us that use Windows are so terrible at not having spaces in our file names, because Windows makes it so easy to handle that. The GUI makes it easy. So we often have a lot of spaces in our file names, and unfortunately, sometimes you're on the other end of that, you're receiving that data, and you don't have time to maybe run through 1,000 sets of file names and change them all individually. You could have scripts that do that, of course, but it's much easier to have scripts that are flexible and that can handle that from the get-go. So we haven't spoken about this too much, but one way that you can control input is by using quotation marks around words that might have spaces, so that the shell knows that whatever sits within those quotation marks is actually the, for example, name of the file that you want to specify. It's not going to then interpret a gap in the file name as anything else. It will interpret it as sort of being part of the file name. So they give an example here. This data obviously is not going to exist, but just to demonstrate what we mean. Maybe this will also help with understanding. So for file name, and they give an example of a file name that has a space, and you can see I'm putting it around inverted commas. Sorry. So this obviously doesn't exist within our data set. So this isn't going to run. It will return an error, but that's fine. We just want to demonstrate it for now. Anyway, I already made a mistake there. So for file name, we wanted to do head minus n 100. So the same process that we had before. And then if you wanted to call the, wait, let me just type it out step by step, because I think this might confuse people. Let's just do it the right way. So we're going to say do, we'll say head minus n 100 to give me the top 100 lines. And then in this case, you would also wrap your variable in quotation marks. And I'm going to speak you through this in just a second. And you're going to pipe that to tail 20. So you've essentially done the same thing here as you've done before, but here what we've done is we've put the file name. Okay, this is not exactly right, but anyway, there's a spelling error. But we've put the file name and the variable inside of quotation marks. So this helps when file names have gaps, because the quotation marks is basically telling it that it needs to interpret this as basically one string. In layman's terms, basically interprets this as one string. And because we put quotation marks here around the variable, again, it will do the same thing here. If we had just pulled in the file names and it's got a space in between them, what the shell is going to interpret is not going to be correct, because then after the red, there's now a space. So it's going to assume that red is the file name, not red-dragon.dat. And this space will be there. So it's going to assume that something else is coming next, not the rest of the file name. So often it can break your scripts. It can do funny things. It can cause a lot of issues. So here, it's obviously saying there's no such file or directory because this doesn't exist. This was just for demonstrating. But that's an easy way to control when you do have spaces in your names, is to put it around quotation marks. This is also good practice when you're writing scripts that will be reused, especially by other people. So even if you know that all of your file names don't have spaces, and perhaps you could use $file name just without the quotation marks, it's always good practice when you're writing scripts for reuse that you add quotation marks, just as a rule of thumb even, so that when other people are using it, the scripts aren't suddenly breaking and they maybe don't know how to find the problem. So this is good practice, particularly for things that you will reuse a lot. Okay, so I'm going to continue on now with the rest of the lesson. That was just a little bit of an insert. Maybe I could have covered that at the end because it was a bit of an odd insert to do this at this point. But yeah, anyway, let's carry on. So we're going back to the creatures directory. We haven't left it. We're still in this directory. We haven't created any new files. We haven't done anything special here. So we still just have the original file names and the original files. But now we want to imagine that we want to do something to our files. This is obviously common when you're doing data analysis, for example. But now we want an output file that differs from the input file in terms of its name at the very least. So you want to be able to separate your original files from your edited files or your output files. Okay, so we're going to step through some examples for essentially how you could do that. They've given examples of things you can't do and given examples of things you can do, for example, with the for loop to accomplish this. And we're going to step through those and let's see if we can all stay on track with this. And I'll just follow the example the way that Carpentry gives it so that we don't sort of get lost, and you can go back if you, for whatever reason, do get lost a little bit. Maybe you're covering this with a video later on, and then it won't make sense if I've deviated from the contents. I'll stick to it quite closely. So the example they give, or the scenario they paint, is just, like I said, we would like to modify each of our files within this creatures directory, but we want to save a version of the original files and name the copies with a prefix of original. Okay, so we want to make a copy of the original file so that we've got a copy of the original file. And then we want to use the files that we've got to run some analyses and change it and modify it, but we want that copy file. So you can do it either way. You can either specify that the output files, so the changed files, have a new appendix, or you can make copies of your files first and then work with the original file. So that doesn't really matter. The example that they are giving here is that you make a copy of the original file and then you work with the actual original file and you modify that. I'm not sure if that is best practice, but let's go with the example that they give. So they are first saying copy all the original files. Sorry, .dat. Remember, so we're using a wildcard. And we're using the copy command. I don't know if you can recall, but with the copy, we make a copy of the file and we can actually rename it within that same process. So we are going to add original $.dat. So what this is going to do is copy each of these files and then not append, but prefix original dash to each of the copied files. So we're copying the files and then renaming them in one little script. But now it's saying original.dat is not a directory. So what does this remind us of? This is something we learned yesterday. What did we learn yesterday when we used the copy command? Do you recall? There was one little thing we didn't cover too extensively, but there was one little thing that we demonstrated yesterday. Remember, we did a thesis backup. I think that was the example we used. We did a thesis backup. So Maurice is saying it's missing a dot. So Maurice is saying if we had done this, it would have worked. Do you all agree? Or disagree? So we can definitely do this and see what happens, but I first want to see if everybody agrees with this or not, and maybe why. So I know why you're saying this, Maurice, but I just want to get a feel from the group. So Sane is saying, not sure that that will fix it. Okay, I'm not seeing any other responses, but let's not get bogged down on this. Let's run this and let's see what happens. Oh, there's still a problem. So let's talk through why this is giving us this error. I don't know if you recall, but the copy command, when it receives more than 2 inputs, the final sort of input that you pass has to be the directory where it can copy the files. Okay, so we haven't given it a directory where it can copy the files. We have told it that the directory in the context of this command is original dash wildcard.dat. That doesn't exist. That isn't a directory. So this wouldn't work, but you could do this in a for loop and you could basically tell it to do what you want it to do. and it's much easier. So let me just talk you through how you would do this in a for loop, for example. So if we said for file name, so again, file name is just whatever variable name you want to give in star.dat. So that's again saying take all of the .dat files, then do. Now you're going to say copy $ your file name. And now you're going to give it the next file name. So now you can say original dash $ file name. And then you're going to hit done. So do you think this is going to work this time?
I think it probably will, because you're making it very clear what the new file is that you're creating. I suspect in the past the issue was that the stars is kind of taking in everything and you want to put it everywhere and it's not linking it up, like it's not establishing that one-to-one relationship in our previous command. But now it's going to be like, here's the file name, put it in this new one. Like very direct.
Exactly. So conceptually, you understood this actually quite well. So now
it took a while, but yeah.
Yeah. So now it's parsing, like you said, each file name in one at a time, rather trying to expand this first on the command line and trying to copy everything all at the same time, which breaks the command. So this again is where for loops become really, really useful. There are certain things that you won't be able to do on the command line, but thinking about it and thinking about how you would apply it within a for loop, you can often figure out things that you can't just do on the command line. And then it's also quite simple. So now if we do an ls, you will actually see it's done what we've wanted it to do. We've now got a copy of the original data prefixed with original. So now we know immediately there's our original data, it's ran, we've got the copy, and we've also got the copy we now can play around and work with. So it wasn't too complex, but it did just kind of require like a little bit of thinking. Okay. But the main reason why it didn't work on the command line, like I said, just in case you're wondering why is it working here and not elsewhere, is because right now on the command line, before we put it in the loop, we just weren't really specifying properly. At least the shell wasn't understanding what the output directory was going to be, because the way we specified things was very clunky and very wonky. And one thing you must always remember is when you add a $ here, what you must think in your head is when the script runs or the shell reads this, it's going to read CP and it's going to expand whatever is here. So when it expands, it becomes basilisk, minotaur, and unicorn. Then it will move on here, become original dash basilisk, minotaur, and unicorn. So then it doesn't know where it needs to put it. It didn't work when we put the dot there, which should have represented current directory, but that's again just because of the way the shell is reading things. But that was a simple workaround in essence. And I think Sane explained it well, that now within the loop, instead of trying to do it all at once, you're doing it one file at a time so it understands more clearly what you're trying to tell it to do. So I think that was fairly okay now. I think you all kind of understood that. I want to just kind of now that we've done some loops, we've done a bit of piping and pulling things together. Let's now go back to Nell's example. So we'll end off here for this portion and then we'll take a quick break. I'm really not sure if we're going to get through everything, but I think at least before the end of today, let's try and get through shell scripts at the very least. If we cannot get to finding things, perhaps that is something you can cover on your own, but maybe we can just demonstrate one or two key things there just before the lesson ends. I just quickly want to stop sharing and switch back to my screen. Let me just quickly scroll down to where we were. So we've worked through quite a few of these examples. Just to note, there are 1 or 2 examples that we didn't work through, so that can maybe be for your own practice. But we've gone through all of this now, and we just want to get through to null's pipeline again. So remember, with the previous lesson, we just, with null's pipeline, strung a few things together. We saw that one file had less lines than the others. We also saw that missing files were labeled with a Z at the end. And so we knew that possibly there were some issues with those files, but all of our good file types are labeled A or B at the end. So it's appended with an A or B before the file extension. So again, they give you the scenario, and I'll read through the scenario. I'm going to just start going through how they suggest we'll do it, but I'll switch to my terminal and we can demonstrate this and do this together because we've got these data. And then we can see if we can take a break after that. Just a bit worried about time, but let's see. Okay, so the next portion of this now is saying null is now ready to process her data files using this inherited program, if you can remember, that she inherited from a supervisor. This program, if you recall, does a bit of statistics from her protein sample files and arguments, an input file and an output file. So an input file containing the raw data and an output file to store, calculate statistics. So those are the two things, those are the two arguments that the script accepts. But now they are saying she's still new to learning the shell. So she wants to build up the required commands of the script in stages. And her first step is to make sure that she can select the right input files, of course. And then after that, we want to specify our output files. So the way that they explain it here is that we're going to use a for loop to do something, okay, to change the file name, almost the way we did before, etc., etc. So I'm going to switch from this view and back to my terminal. And I'm going to step through this, but if at any point you want me to come back to this web page so that you can see how things are sort of visualized here and displayed here, then that's not a problem. But it is a fairly simple example. It's just a few steps that we're going to try and step through now. So hopefully it won't cause too much trouble. So we will have a break just after this. I know we have been going for a very, very long time. So we will have a break just after we work through this sort of example of null, if that's okay with everybody. Okay, so I'm just going back to sharing my terminal again, and we're going to work through this example that they give. So the first thing they say is that we need to be in North Pacific Jaya. So we need to go back to the main directory. So let's change directories and go 2 levels up. This will allow you to go 2 levels up. And then there we see the North Pacific Jaya. So we're going to change directory into that using tab completion here. And when I do an ls, here are all the files again that we saw earlier. So this is not new. We saw all of these files a little bit earlier. So now remember, they are saying that she wants to build up scripts iteratively. So firstly, she wants to start by just printing out what are the files that are going to be an input file. So she just wants to make sure that the first portion of a script is identifying the correct files. So she writes a little script called for data file in NE wildcard. You see all of our scripts start with NE, and then it's got some numeric code, and then it ends with either A or B or Z. Now we don't want the Z's because they contain missing data. We saw that in a previous example, but we want all of these files that end in either A or B. So we're going to say we want all the files that end in B, that end in A, and then all the files that end in B. Okay, so we want all of those files. That's what we're going to loop over. But all we're going to do with this loop is we're just going to echo the file name, just so that we see that we are actually using the correct file. So I've written file name, that's not correct. It should be data file. The variable there is data file, so I need to write data file. And then I'm going to say done. Okay, so now it's echoed back to me, or printed to the screen, all the file names that end in either A or B, or the text file. So we've ignored anything else that isn't a text file. So we've done a little bit of simple pattern matching here. So we know, okay, we now have the correct files. These are our proper data files that don't have issues. So that's step one. Okay. So now the next step, like we said, is to determine what the output files are going to look like. So in the previous example, we prefixed original in front of our sample names. And so we saw how to do that. So for this particular example, Nell decides that she's going to prefix all of her result files with stats in the beginning. So then she knows those are her output files. Okay, so now we're going to modify the loop slightly so that we can say we now want to have an output file that's named slightly different, that's got the stats appended at the front. But before we actually run the command, we're going to echo back what we want to do. So this is a good way to test that what you're doing is actually what you think is going to be happening by printing things, basically printing your commands and things that you're going to run back to the screen to just see that it is operating the way you want to operate. So they've demonstrated that with this next portion of the example. So if you go forward data file, I'm just typing it out again because it might be better visually to see it like this. Dot text, so we want everything with an A or anything with the B. Oops, sorry. Anything with the B, and we're gonna do the same thing, which is echo the $data file. But this time, we're also gonna echo stats. So we're not doing anything here. We're not creating the file. We're just echoing back, remember? So we're just printing to the screen exactly what we've got here. And this is a good way, like I've said, to just test that what you think is happening is actually going to be happening within the script. So that's all they're demonstrating here. Again, this is another sort of utility of echo. If you've got this somewhere in your scripts, it'll often just echo, obviously, back what's next to it and what variables you're calling. So you can basically echo back what's running within your script so that you see something. Because usually when your scripts are running, you're not seeing anything. You'll see an output maybe at the end. But while it's running, you're not going to see anything unless you also tell the script to print something to the screen. So we can tell it to print or echo, for example, a file name once it's created back to the screen and so on and so on. And it's just kind of demonstrating that. So if I run this, you'll see that it's echoed back the name of the file. And here we've done stats $data file. So all it's done is added stats to each of these files. So it's just, again, echoing back exactly what we told it to echo back. But if we do an ls, these stats files were not created. It wasn't created yet. You're just testing your loop to see what's going on inside of it. Okay. Let me just do a quick check-in here to see if you guys are still fine or your energy level still there. There's just 2 more steps to this example, and then we are done with this and we can take a break. But are you guys still okay? Are you hanging in there? Because I've noticed people have got very quiet. Okay, let me just finish off with this example. We'll take a break. When we come back, if you still have questions about the example, we can address it then. Let me just run through it. So now we know that whatever we're going to tell this particular script to run is operating on the right things. We can see that the output files would look the way we want it to look. So let's see if we actually ran this. We'll see we've got this goostats.sh, this inherited program. I'm not going to open the program for now and look at what's in there. We'll get to that. But for now, let's modify what we ran before. So before we said for data file, and we specified all the data files ending with an A and a B and .text. We then said echo data file and also echo stats $data file. So basically echo back stats and the name of the data file. Now what we're going to do is we're going to do something slightly different. We're going to modify this line of code. And we are actually going to tell it. This is how you call a script within the shell. So we're going to say bash goostats, because that's the file that we want to use, .sh. And remember, this file accepts 2 arguments, and we're echoing those arguments now within the script. We're telling it what data file to run on. So the first thing it's going to read is data file. Remember, it accepts 2 arguments. So it accepts the input and it accepts the output file. Those are the 2 things that the script says you must specify. So that's what we've done here. I just want to be sure that you're not getting confused by that. So we are calling the script. The script itself accepts 2 arguments, an input and an output file. And we've basically identified what the input and output files are because we are using echo. Remember, what the shell is going to read is the following, right? Because we're using echo, what is actually being passed to this script is just this text that we've got here. Nene, blah, 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 then stats dot text with the stats appended. It will pass this 1 row at a time, loop around, pass it again, loop around, pass it again. So in theory, it has the input data and it's pushing the stats, the results, to this stats output data file because it sees that this like this sort of on the command line. This is what the shell sort of is interpreting. So when we do that now, okay, so we've added in our do bash blah 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 blah. It's now saying 2 arguments, goostats file 1 and file 1. That is not really what was supposed to happen. So let me just check if I've put something in incorrectly.
Is the echo? I don't know if the echo is necessary.
Sorry, I wasn't supposed to put the echo there. You are correct.
Yeah,
You don't need the echo.
Just take
Sorry.
file 1.
Yes, the file.
No, I think it was trying to put echo
file
itself in.
Yeah, sorry about that. That was a little mistake on my end. It should run now.
Your cursor blinking means it is still running, right?
Yes, this means something's happening in the background. It's not done yet. Let's see if it finishes. Otherwise, remember, if something hangs or you've done anything incorrectly, you can press Ctrl+C and that will kill basically the job that's running. But I want to see if this finishes off and completes. Otherwise, perhaps I've done something else wrong. Oh, it's gone. It seems like it's completed. Let's see if it has actually completed. Let's just do a quick ls. Yay, it's done it. So now we've got stats for each of the files. Don't know what might be in here, but let's just maybe do a cat. Let's see what's in stats. 01729A. Okay, let's see. Okay, so it has some stats here. I'm not sure what stats these are, but there are some stats here. Okay, so it's run some stats for each of these files, and we'll look at what it's run a little bit later. But if you want to explore what's in that goostats.sh file, can take a look at what's in there. I'm not going to go there for now. It's basically done what we've wanted it to do, so yay, success. But what we've demonstrated here now, just before we go on to break, is something actually very, very important, and that is that you can call a bash script. So this is a script that we've called within our for loop. So this script contains other coding and other programming. It's also Unix programming, but it contains other programming that's performing other more complex statistics that we're pulling into this for loop. And this again is one of those things that make Unix and of course other programming languages so wonderful to use, is you can do very complex things very quickly. If you know how to build up your scripts really well, call your scripts within the command line, you can do a lot of complex analyses even, and do many steps in just a few lines of code. And that is essentially what we want to demonstrate here. We haven't done bash scripts yet. That we'll do maybe for the rest of the day. We'll see how it goes. But when we come back from break, we're basically going to start looking at this file, how to write your own little script, how to store your scripts, and then how to call it on the command line. So we've kind of done it here, but maybe it's not that clear yet. So we can definitely circle back to this example maybe after we've done the shell scripts, and then hopefully this will be a little bit more clear, but we're going to talk about that when we get to scripts. I haven't also shown you how to explore the history, but let's do that after we come back from break. I won't spend too much time on that. And then we can just sort of just move on to shell scripts. Okay, so let's take a break here. We have been on the call really, really long. So let's take a nice break. Let's take a 30-minute break, if that's okay with everybody. 30 minutes. Is that okay? Yes, no, yeah. Take like a good proper break. Okay, cool. So let's be back at 11:30. I'm going to set the little timer that I was using yesterday as well and share it on the screen. Thanks, Nikita. There's one quick thing that I want to show you. Just before we shift on to shell scripts, and with the shell script section, we might not have time to do too many exercises, but I'll try and do at least one or two with you, because we are just starting to run a little bit short on time, but let's see how we go. Just before we get to that, I'm sure some of you might be wondering if the shell records any kind of history, or if you can pull up your history. You could see when you use the up arrow and the down arrow and so on, that actually a lot of your commands were recorded somewhere. So you can pull up the history of the commands that you've run. And there are some shortcuts that you can use to basically, for example, rerun a line of code. If you know you want to rerun a specific line of code, maybe you just quickly want to edit it and then quickly rerun it or something like that. I'm not going to go into this in too much detail, but I will just demonstrate it very quickly for you guys. You can always then obviously use the -- help, if you recall, and look at the history command and what you can do with it, and look at some of those manual pages if you like, so that you can maybe see what else you could possibly do with that. But I thought I would quickly do this before we move on to the shell scripts. It is the last portion of the pipes. I'm just going to type clear quickly to clear my terminal. But it is the last portion of the loops episode that do actually tell us to cover the history command. The one thing I do want to say is there are a couple of other examples on this loops page that we obviously haven't had time to cover. There are also a couple towards the end of the page that are a little bit more advanced. I think there's one example for nested loops. Let me just see. Yeah, there's at least one example for a nested loop. So that's a loop within a loop. We're not really going to have time to discuss that, seeing as we do still have some other content to cover. But I'm just pointing you towards it so that if you'd like to take a look at it, maybe after the session ends at any point in time, then you can go ahead and do that. Okay. But we are going to now just quickly demonstrate the history command. I'm not going to do anything too complex with this. I just want to show you what happens. Now, you would have noticed that obviously I've typed in a lot of things throughout the process of the session. You've also likely typed in quite a lot of things throughout the process of this session. So if I said history, which would pull up basically I think it's the last few hundred commands that you've executed on the command line. So we don't want to pull up all of that because then it will just run across our window now. But so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to say history and pipe that to the tail command. So basically what I'm saying is just bring up the last 5 lines of code that I ran. And you'll actually see that these are the last few lines of code that I ran. And remember, I cleared my terminal as well. It's recorded that. So this is very useful as well. If, for example, you maybe want to rerun something and you maybe just quickly want to edit the line of code, or maybe you just want to rerun the line as is. And then there are a couple of shortcuts for how to do that. The example they give here as well is to use an exclamation point and then to say the line of code, and then you can see what it's done actually. It's run the line of code. Oops, sorry. It's run the line of code that was on that line. Cool, eh? So if you had some complex line of code like this one, you could rerun it, but just using the exclamation point, and the shell will know what you're trying to do. So it's also a nice little like handy shortcut. So now it's actually repeating this whole for loop that I ran earlier. And it's actually probably rebuilding up these files now. But you see how quick I could rerun that. I didn't have to type anything, didn't have to do anything. I'm just going to leave that to run finish quickly. And then I'll move on after this. But this is very, very useful. You can also think about if maybe you've run a whole bunch of commands and you maybe want to output that to a text file, for example, that you can then save. Maybe you then import that into some other type of notepad and you continue to edit it or work on it, but maybe you want to pull up those list of commands that got you to a certain endpoint. Then something like this would become very, very useful. But I'm not going to say much more about that now. You can play around with the history command, look at maybe some of the manual pages as well, and see how you can get it to operate slightly differently or do different things and so on and so on. So I just wanted to show you that very quickly, and then we're going to move on to shell scripts. So I'm going to clear my terminal for now. And now we're going to start building our first little shell script and hopefully being able to almost finish off null's pipeline. We'll see how far we get. Like I said, I might skip over a section here and there in the interest of time. But it is quite likely that we're not going to have time to do the full finding things portion of the lesson. But what I'll do there is I'll just demonstrate a few things to you towards the end of the session, just so that at least we've covered it to some extent. And then tomorrow when you come back for the Git lesson, if there are still any questions that you have or anything like that, then you're still welcome to ask us. I'll also be on the call tomorrow. So you'll still be able to ask questions about any of this that you maybe weren't comfortable with. Not while Nikita's teaching her lesson, of course, but maybe afterwards if we have a bit of time, or maybe before if you join a bit early so we can see. But we're gonna move on now to shell scripts. So this will be the first bit of scripting that we've done this week. I just want to again quickly stop sharing and just switch to the workshop website. Sorry. Okay. So the key question that we would like to answer with this particular episode or portion of the lesson is how can I save and reuse commands? So you can see that sometimes, we go through several steps to get to a specific output or endpoint. If you want to repeat all of those steps again, you then have to type it. So that's where scripts become really, really powerful, is you can start to combine those different commands into something called a script, which you can then call via the command line and it will run that script for you. So this is basically what we're demonstrating here. A lot of you guys, I looked at your pre-workshop survey, a lot of you guys seem to actually have a bit of programming and coding experience. I don't think I need to talk to you about, what a script is too much. But if you want me to go through some of the background in a little bit more detail, then we can definitely do that. But best way to learn this is actually to just go through some examples and demonstrations. So that's what we're going to do. I'm going to shift to my terminal now. Okay. Sorry, let me just shift it down here. You should all be seeing my terminal now. Okay. They want us to now go back to the proteins subdirectory in order to execute shell scripts. So we are currently in North Pacific Gyre. I think it was in the exercise data. Let me just see. Yeah. So we're going to change directory back to exercise data. Once you've shifted back to shell lesson data. So just go back to the main folder. And then we'll shift back into exercise data again. Then we're gonna change directory into the proteins subdirectory over here. So let's do that. Okay, let's do a quick ls to see what's in there. Okay, same directory we've been working with quite often. So we're going to actually write our first little script right off the bat. So I don't know if you can recall, but previously we used a text editor called Nano. And we put just a bit of text in there and we saved it. So now what we're going to do is open up a file using Nano. We're going to put a little bit of script in there and then we're going to try and run the file and see what happens. So type Nano. And then remember, you must give the file a name. So we're giving the file a name already called middle.sh. So this is the extension for scripts on the shell. So shell. But all the shell scripts, and then it will recognize it as a script and know that it needs to execute it as well. You have to give it this .sh file extension. So let's do nano middle.sh. And then we'll obviously open the nano text editor. In this editor, you're going to write a command. We're going to do here. This is not new. Okay, octane.pdb. You're going to pipe that into tail minus n 5. Okay. So what we are putting in the script at the moment is give me the first 15 lines of this file. So here we are actually specifying a file already in the script. We're not giving it a variable, passing anything. We're just saying run this bit of code across this file. So give me the first 15 lines and then pipe that to tail minus n5. So the last 5 lines of the first 15 lines. Okay. Then if you recall, to save that file, you have to press Ctrl-O. So Ctrl-O. Then you will see here, it says file name to write middle.sh. You're just going to hit enter. And it says there, wrote one line. Then you're going to hit Ctrl-X to exit. Now let's just do a quick ls. And we see middle.sh has now formed within this. Now, if we do a quick, say, a cat, middle.sh, you can see this line of code exists within this file, right? Now, earlier we ran goostats.sh using bash. So we just called it using bash. And that's how we mentioned, I'm not sure if you can recall, but that's what we mentioned you need to do if you want to call a shell script. So that bash will know what you're doing, and the shell, the script extension, the file extension, also helps it recognize what it needs to do with that particular file. So let's see what happens if we run this. Hey, it's worked. So it's actually run the script. It's run the middle.sh script, but one thing we didn't do is make the script very flexible or dynamic. We just specified run this on octane.pdp, and we've ran it and it worked. So we have just created and run our first little script. As simple as that. Okay, so before we continue, can you all try that if you haven't already? I'll give you a few minutes, not a few minutes, but a minute or two to do that. It's just give me perhaps a thumbs up when you've managed to do that. And it's worked. Okay, I see one thumbs up. Okay, fantastic. Anybody else managed to do this yet? Or are you running into any issues that we can help with? Okay, I see another thumbs up. Awesome. And you've ran your script and it's worked. Awesome. Awesome. Okay, that's perfect. But now one thing you would have noticed with the script is that we've specified a file name. So every time that we want to run this on a new file, you're going to have to go into the script and change this name of the file over and over and over again. So you want to avoid that. So you want to again use a variable, right? So let's try and use a variable. Let's go nano middle.sh again. Let's open it back up. Okay. So here we've got octane.pdp. We want to add a variable. And we're going to use the $sign to call the variable again, but this time the variable works slightly differently. This time we're going to enter 1. Now this is different to what we've done before. We're now using something numeric here, but this represents something as well. When you are inside a shell script, a $1 basically means the first argument on the command line. So what's going to happen is when we run the script, we're going to need to specify what is that first variable, right? In that same way, we could have added another variable, maybe for the number of lines, and we could have called that $2 or $3. We'll do that in a second. We're not going to do it yet. But then we would have had to specify those variables on the command line as well in the order that you need, that it's specified here. So let's just leave that as $1 right now. So that means the first argument that we put on the command line next to the script. So let's demonstrate that. But firstly, we need to save this. So we're going to Control-O, Enter, and Control-X. And let's just make sure that it's saved properly. So let's just print that to the screen. Okay, it's saved. There's the $1 variable. So now, again, remember, in order to call the script, to use the script, you must tell it by first doing bash, entering the command bash, telling it the name of the script, which in our case is middle.sh. And now remember, we use $1, which means the first argument on the command line. So the argument I'm going to pass it now is the name of the file, which was octane.pdp. And now when I press enter, it's done the same thing, but I can reuse the script for as many of the other file names that we've got here, or proteins that we've got here, just by specifying the name of the protein. So that already makes this script a lot more reusable, don't you think? So we could have done bash middle pentane.pdp, and it would have ran the script for pentane.pdp. It would have pulled out those lines from the file that we've been asking for. But everything could have been an argument, not everything, but a lot of other things could have been arguments within that script. So let's add a few more variables and let's see. So we're going to nano middle.sh again. So other things that we could maybe easily turn into a little variable is, for example, the number of lines. So let's make this $2. And then let's make this $3. And remember, when you're using scripts and you want to reuse scripts as well, we mentioned that it is often good practice to put things around, well, within inverted commas, so that no spaces or anything like that oddly creep in that then breaks the script. So I'm just going to do that and put that in inverted commas. Okay, so just do that for me. And then we're going to run the script, and we're going to now be able to pass 3 arguments. Okay, so in order for the script to run, it needs us to tell it what argument 1 is, what argument 2 is, and what argument 3 is. Now remember, we wanted argument 2 over here to be 50, and this argument to be 5. This was 5, the last 5 rows of the first 15 rows. Right. So we can specify what we want now using the command line. So let's first write this out and save this and exit. And again, we will use bash to say we're going to be using a script. So we do middle.sh, and now we need to pass those 3 arguments, but we need to pass it in order. So let's start with pentane. Remember, $1 was the name of the file that we need to pass, right? The next argument that we need to pass is the head. We had $2, which is the head, that file number of lines that we wanted. So it was 15. Then we wanted to pass the third variable to tail, and we said the last 5 lines of 15. So these are 3 variables now that we've passed: pentane, the head, and the tail, the number of lines. And now if we run that, it will execute what we want, and we just have the 5 lines that we wanted. And what makes the script now very flexible is that now you can change these parameters. So you can say, give me 20, and then give me the last 3 lines, and then it will do that. You could then call this perhaps in a loop, and you can do this maybe for every file that exists in a list, for example. So it gives you lots and lots and lots of flexibility. Before I continue now, are you all on the same page with me up until this point? I'm going to give you a second to maybe make some of those edits to your own shell scripts and run them and see what happens on your own shells. If there are any errors that crop up or anything like that, you can also let us know. So I'm going to pause for a second again. Please give me a thumbs up if you've managed to get to this point. Yeah, I see 1 thumbs up so far, so I'll give everybody else a second to catch up as well. Maybe you've gotten lost along the way, so let's give you a bit of time. But if you also are getting lost along the way, I mean, also just let us know. Okay, do see another thumbs up. So at least a couple of people are managing to do this. That's excellent. That's really fantastic. Okay, so that more people are able to follow along and that we haven't lost you at some point. If you are following along, please just also give me a thumbs up so I know that the other people are maybe not just lost If you are lost, please give me a thumbs down or give me some other reaction so that we can know that maybe you need a bit of help. Okay, so I'll continue on for now. Maybe everybody's a little bit tired as well because it has been a long day already, which is fine. So let's just carry on then. We're now going to try and build a second script, and we're going to try and also be working with these .pdp files. But what we're going to do is we're going to try and build the script that can loop over multiple files. So let's see how to do. I'm sure you're interested in seeing how that's done. So I want to just remind you of a script we ran during one of yesterday's lessons, which is this word count minus L with the wildcard.pdp, which is just saying count the number of lines in each PDP file. And then it's piping that to sort minus N, which in this case is going to mean sort numerically. So if we pressed enter, this is quite similar to what we saw yesterday. This is nothing new, but you do see this all.pdp file that's also here now. So that's also picked up, which is perfect. That's exactly what we asked it to do. Okay. So now we're going to actually write a little command that can sort across several sets of files, or yeah, several sets of files basically. So let's do nano. So again, you're using the nano text editor to write your little script file, and we're going to call it sorted.sh. Remember the file extension for scripts. You click enter, and it's going to open a little nano window. Right, so what we want to do is sort files by the length, and we want to be able to incorporate a number of different files or sets of files. So we're going to be using characters that again are slightly new. So I'm going to try and explain it to you as best as I can, and hopefully it doesn't confuse you too much, but it's very useful and it's something you will see going forward that comes up in a lot of scripts that other people use. So let me just start by typing the script and then I'll talk you through what's happening here. So this you have seen before. What you haven't seen before are, you have seen $1 before, but you haven't seen us use an @ before. Okay, and I'm just putting that in inverted commas for the reasons I've outlined earlier. And then I'm again just saying sort numerically. So this is a unique sort of variable. And what this variable means is use all of the command line arguments and pass that to the shell script. Okay, so again, we've put this in quotation marks in case anything that's within these sets of files contains spaces and might break the code. And so we want to be sure that that doesn't happen. But it is a little special syntax now. And again, it is different to what you've seen before. But what's really fantastic is now you can pass sets of files and multiple sets of files, made sometimes even in different locations, and it will run this. So let's see if it actually runs this. Let's see if it works. So we're going to write this out or save this with Control-O. We're going to save. We're going to Control exit. Let's just ls to make sure that it's there. And yes, we've got sorted there. Let's do a quick cat. Let's print that to the screen. Okay, it looks good. Looks right. So now here's where things get very interesting. So now I'm going to say bash, and I'm going to say sorted.sh because that's the script obviously I'm going to use. But now I'm going to use a wildcard and say .pdp. So what's that saying? So all the files that end in PDP is going to be sorted using the script. But now we can specify another directory. So we can say go one level up, look at the creatures directory, and then do this, run the script across all of the .dat files. So that was the genomic data files, if you recall, the basilisk.dat, minotaur.dat, etc., etc. And then you can run the script and you can see it's done it for everything now. And that, of course, a lot of you already know the utility and power of scripts, but I'm just demonstrating it on the command line. And this is how you could pass, multiple sets of files and get it to run across multiple things. You can already imagine that when you are to start building, like complex scripts and nested loops and everything, you can actually build up a very, very complex script that does a lot of things at the click of a button while you continue on and doing other things while things are running. But that in a nutshell is scripting. We've got a couple of examples here that we can work through that I think maybe we should, just to get a bit more practice, maybe just 1 or 2. It's already almost 12. But maybe let's work through one example, and then we can go on to Nell's pipeline again, and let's see what we can do there. I'm not going to work through the rest of the examples because it might take us just a little bit too much time. But then I'll end off maybe the last 20 minutes or so just finding things, and then we can wrap it up for today. So let me just find this example quickly. There's an example I know that, yeah, okay. Just going to stop sharing and just switch to the example, and then we can demonstrate it. So on this shell scripts page, there's this little example that says list unique species. Okay, so I'll talk you through what it wants you to do, and then I'm going to give you, say, 5 to 10 minutes to try and do this on your own and then feedback, and then we'll go through the solution, and I'll also demonstrate it on my end. So you will recall the animals.csv file. It didn't have too much in there, but what we had was this list of basically observations. Now, in one of the previous exercises, we showed you the output of what this command does. It produces, obviously, a list of unique animal names. Okay, so I don't know if you recall this. We can run through it again a little bit later, but we can also just run it on your machine and see what it does. But now they say in order to avoid having to type out the series of commands every single time, scientists may choose to write a shell script like we've written now. And they are asking you to write a shell script called species.sh that takes any number of file names as command line arguments. So this is a key point here, any number of file names as command line arguments, and uses a variation of the above commands to print a list of the unique species appearing in each of those files separately. So it seems a bit complex, but think about it step by step. Think through it step by step and see if you can produce this script. I'll keep this up on the screen in case you want to read it. Don't go to the solution just yet. First try it, and then what else? Oops, it's muted me for some reason. I'm not sure what you heard last. Can you tell me where I got muted and dropped off? Did you hear my explanation of this exercise?
I think you told us you would leave it on the screen, and then shortly after that we lost you.
Okay, sure. Sorry about that. So I was saying I'll just leave it up here on the screen for you to try on your own first. Just give me a thumbs up if you've managed to build the script. And also if perhaps you are happy to talk us through how you've done that. Just give me a thumbs up firstly if you've managed to do it. And then via the chat, let us know if you might be willing to maybe share your screen and talk us through how you've done that. And then we can go through the solution quickly as a group. Okay, so I'm going to mute myself just for the next couple of minutes while you guys work through this. Let's take no more than 10 minutes. So let's set 10 minutes on the clock. And when the timer goes off, hopefully most of you would have been able to do that. And then we can talk through the solution.
Verena, could you please put it back on the screen so we don't have to find it ourselves?
Sorry, yes. Sorry about that.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're coming up to the end of our timer. I'm just actually gonna stop it because I have not seen any thumbs up so far. So I don't know if that means that you haven't succeeded, or if you need more time to work on the example. I'm not too sure. Okay, so Yandile is saying, please explain the task again and give a few minutes. So I do think we are running a little bit short on time, and there are a few other things I wanted to demonstrate. So I think what I'll do instead is I'll just run through the solution that they've provided. And then I'll just talk you through why it works and why it's a good solution. There is a little portion of Null's pipeline that we needed to do, but it's just reiterating some of what we've learned with the lesson. So I'm going to skip that for now and just ask that you maybe try to go through that on your own when you have a bit of time in the future, so that I can just demonstrate some of the concepts from finding things after we work through this example. I do also just want to do a quick wrap up at the end to just cover everything again, just to refresh your memory, so that when you do come back to this maybe in the future, you know, you're well equipped to work through the content that we maybe haven't gotten through. So I hope that that's okay, because we only have about 45 minutes left on the call. So I'm going to stop sharing and just quickly shift to my screen, my Git bash. Okay, so the exercise asked you to write a shell script called species.sh that can take any number of file names as command line arguments. And they've said or suggested that you can use a variation of the command that they've provided that produced the unique species names to basically print unique species names appearing in each file separately. Okay, so this isn't something we can probably demonstrate that well, because it's probably only going to be a couple of file names where this is going to work. It's one file name where it's really going to work. So we're not going to run it, but they just wanted you to write the script. So I'll start by doing a nano. And the script must be called species.sh. So let's start by actually just getting a blank canvas open. One other thing I haven't demonstrated to you yet as well is that you can comment your script, and it's good practice to always put comments in your script. So comment is something in your script that doesn't actually get run by the shell, and you specify that it's a comment and it's not supposed to be run by using a hash. And then you can enter some information, and it'll be in your script file, but it won't actually read on the shell, so it won't run. So this is a nice way to annotate your code, to tell people who might use your code later on what's happening in the code, or what specific commands do. So those of you that have done a bit of programming before probably already have experience with commenting. So maybe I don't need to go into that much detail, but in a nutshell, it's just to help people read your code and understand your code. So let's say we wanted to tell people what this code intends to do when they use the script. So you could say, I'm just going to use the solution that they also give. So, or the example that they give. So you can say script to find unique species in CSV files, where species is the second data field. Okay, then we want to add another comment to say this script accepts any number of file names as command line arguments, right? So already with just these couple of lines of comments, somebody who's taking the script and using it in the future will be a lot more aware of what the script was intended to be used for. So then we can also annotate each different section of our script. So we can say this is to loop over all files, and they're hopping on the all because remember, one of the key parameters that they said is that the script needs to accept any number of file names as command line arguments. So they're already kind of hinting that you should be using that $@ variable, that special variable. So if we were to write the script that does what they wanted to do, I'm going to run through the example that they give, but just always remember that there are often many ways to get to an output or an endpoint. So if your mind works a little bit differently, maybe the way you would have written the script might have been a bit different. Doesn't mean it's wrong, but I'll just cover the example that they give. So for file in C, they're using $@. Okay, so that means any number of files, right? If you recall, then we're saying do the following, and I'm going to tab indent just so that we can see the actual commands that's going to run. This is just a style thing as well, but we're going to say echo back the following words: unique species in $file. Okay, so it's going to basically print this out, unique species in $file. Dollar would mean this file, so that's the name of the first file that it sees, and then loops around and around and around. And then we're going to put a comment here to tell the reader what the next bit of the code does, so we can tell the person who might use this code next time, this bit extracts the species names. Okay, and then remember, they asked you to use a variation of the previous command that they've actually given you that we also have used before, if you recall. So we are specifying the delimiter as comma, and that we want the second field in the file. And remember, this is accurate based on our description. So we said it's a script to find unique species in CSV files where species is the second data field. Oh, I made a misspelling there, but that's fine. So at this point, we're just pulling out that second data field or second column. We're piping that to sort, if you can recall this little script. And then remember, the unique command will filter out the unique names in your script. So we've written a little script now that is actually reusable and that we can use to run something like this. And what they specified was that it can accept any number of file names as command line arguments. And so we've allowed for that by using the special parameter, which we just learned about earlier. So this was the kind of script that they wanted you to build up. Of course, if you did this on your own, your script might look slightly different, but I hope that you all got that the key parameter here as well was this, as well as being able to loop across multiple file names and just outline the number of unique species. So let's say in our example, we had animals.csv, right? But let's say we had 100 of those files, 100 of those records or counts or observations. And in each file, you wanted to filter out the number of unique species that was recorded, for example, in each of those files. This is a script that basically would allow you to get that information out. You could then also redirect this to another file or whatever it might be and store it there, etc., etc. But this is sort of how you start to get to writing up, reusable scripts as well. And this makes the script quite reusable. Anybody who's got data in a similar format can take the script and use it. That's the great thing about scripting as well, of course. So now I'm just going to save this in any case, even though we're not really going to use it, but just to show you that there it is, it's being created. If we cat, you can see there's our nice little script. There we go. Right. So that was essentially what they wanted you guys to do. Are there any questions about this before we move on? No? Okay. Then I will move on for now. I hope everything's fine. Okay. So I think maybe let's, I'm trying to think if we've got the time to run through the null pipeline. Or if we should just shift. Yeah, I think it would be okay for you guys to run through the sort of bottom end of the shell scripts on your own. I think we've covered everything that will help you understand the examples that they give and also understand even the output that they're representing here. So you can also just go and try some of this on your own. And then, like I said, if sometime in the week, if some of us are still around and on the calls, if you have some questions about some of this, if you are trying this on your own, then we can still try and address that. But I just want to, for the last maybe 20 minutes, so that I could also have a bit of time to wrap up. But for the last 20 minutes, I'm going to shift to the final lesson within the Unix lesson, the final portion of the Unix lesson. So let me just shift back to the website. Okay. So the final portion of the Unix lesson is finding things. So we've done quite a few different things throughout the last couple of days already. We've, went through lots of different files and folders, created files and folders, wrote a couple of scripts now. We've done a for loop, we've done some piping and redirecting. So, that foundational principles are all there. But one thing we haven't done is shown you how to search for things using the command line. So those of you on Windows or other GUI systems, you'll know, and if you've ever used most web pages or sites, and even this one, we have this kind of a search functionality, right? You can type something in and you can hit enter and it does the other stuff in the background for you that you don't see, and it returns a result. Now, in the same way, there are some functions that can do things like that for you on the command line. There are two main functions that we're going to talk about today, and that is grep or grep and find. And they are used for different purposes. Grep is basically used to search or select lines from files that match specific patterns. So this searches files, while find tries to find actual files and directories whose names match a certain pattern. So you will tell it, look for XYZ, match this pattern, and give me the files that match this pattern. With grep or grep in the same way, you're looking for lines within files that match a specific pattern. So we're going to demonstrate that now using a couple of examples. I won't spend too much time on this because I do realize we are running out of time. I know I've gone through things very, very slowly, and I hope that that's okay. I've done that so that we have enough time to follow and ask questions and so on. But please do give me feedback during the little wrap up that I'll have, and I'll take that on board whenever I do this again. But let's finish off the final little bit of the lesson. Just going to stop sharing and switch back to my command line again. My shell. Okay, you should be seeing it now. So I'm just quickly going to clear my shell quickly so that we start with a nice blank slate. The first thing I want to say is that we'll be performing this within the writing subdirectory within exercise data. So we can do a cd ... to move one level up. Let's do an ls. So this is the folder that we are targeting. So let's change directory into writing. We have looked and explored this directory before, but let's do an ls, and you'll recall that there's a file called littlewoman.txt and haiku.txt. And then you might recall that we created this, some subdirectories here. We created a thesis and a thesis backup and so on, which we then removed during yesterday's sessions. So you should be familiar with kind of more or less what the contents are here. We haven't explored the text files too much, but that's what we're going to do now. I'm going to use this to demonstrate how to use the grep or grep and how to use find. So let's first just take a look at one of the files. So let's look at haiku.txt. Let's just print it out to the screen. You can see that there are 3 haikus that are inside of this file. The tower that is seen is not the true tower until you bring fresh toner. With searching comes loss. In the presence of absence, my thesis not found. Yesterday it worked, today it is not working. Software is like that. So that's a bunch of haikus that they've got in there. But now let's say you wanted to find specific few lines or lines that match a specific character pattern in a specific text file. How would you go about do that? So remember I said that grep is the command that you could use to search a file. Usually the way that grep works is you will obviously use call the command and then tell it what pattern to search for. So let's search for the pattern not. So essentially it's searching for lines that contain the word not, and then you must tell it where to search. So we're going to search the haiku.txt file for lines that contain the pattern not, or the word not in our case. So when we do that, we see that 3 lines are returned, and each line does have the word not. Okay, so that has functioned the way we thought it was going to function. Now let's try a different word. Let's try grep and put the word the down with a capital T specifically, then type haiku.txt because that's the file we're searching. Now let's see what has happened. Do you see what's different in this output? There are more lines that contain the. So what does that tell you? That grep is case sensitive, right? Because it's only pulled out lines that matched the with a capital T. So it hasn't pulled out any other lines that had a small t, but interestingly, although you told it to match the or the, my thesis not found also came up. So what else does that tell you? Any thoughts? Okay, the group has gone very, very quiet now and are not very interactive anymore. So I'm not sure if you guys are just tired or have lost you somewhere along the line. So let me just try and get through some of this and demonstrate it at the very least. Okay, I see one response. Thanks, Yandile. I feel like I'm talking to myself a little bit. So you're saying it takes one's included words. Okay, I'm not 100% sure if I understand what you mean. But what grep has done in, okay, yeah. So yeah, exactly. So what it's done is it's also looked for the pattern, even if it occurs as part of another word or a longer word or a longer string, right? It returns that whole line. So this is interesting because perhaps what you were looking for was just this pattern, the. So then there's a flag or an option once again that you can pass grep that tells it only return the specific lines with this specific word, nothing appended, nothing prefixed. And that option is called -W. So it's basically saying limit the match to the word boundary. So match exactly the, and then you can type the, and you can search for it again in haiku.txt. And when you press enter, now only this line is returned. So it is actually matching just that particular word. Okay. But now what happens if you're looking for phrases that maybe have spaces? Remember, the shell doesn't do so well with spaces. So you have to put those around within inverted commas. So I'll just do a quick example. So we're going to use the -w option to say, match this basically exactly. But now we're looking for phrase is not, or 2 words is not within the same file. We've put this around inverted commas so that the shell does not interpret the space as something that it's not. And then there we get the one line, today it is not working. So that's the one line that has it is. No other line has it is. There are lines that have it and lines that have is, but no lines that have it is. And that's what we've specified here within quotation marks. So that's how you can still, again, handle spaces. So nothing really new there, just perhaps demonstrated in a slightly different way. So let's say you've got a file and it's got thousands of lines, and you want to find the specific word or specific pattern, and you want to know on which line it exists. So now you can use another option, which is -n, which in this case means number of lines, or the number of the line, sorry, not number of lines, the number of the line where the pattern occurs. So again, meaning something slightly different in this context. I hope this isn't going to confuse anybody now. But now we're just looking for the word it. Okay, and we want to see on which lines it occurs. You can see that within haiku.txt, it occurs in line 5, 9, and 10. Let's check that. 2, 3, 4, 5. Ooh, let me just see. With searching comes loss. Yes, that's the one. Yesterday it worked. Yeah, so you can see 5, 9, and 10. So 5, 9, and 10. So here, again, you see it, but here you see it within a word. So it on this line matched with, because we didn't specify any -w flag. So we didn't say that's the word boundary, which means it would match within words as well. But again, just showing you or demonstrating the -n. So let's demonstrate or use the -n and -w together. Let's do -n, -w, and now we're looking for the pattern the. Still in the same file. If I hit enter now you will see it's only looked for the. If the sat within another word, it didn't pick that up. And because we added the -n option, it's also shown us on which lines you can find this pattern. So pretty useful if you're doing some, literature searching or something like that through files that are structured the same way, especially. You can write some nice scripts to search through literature and find certain things that you want to find. Okay. So the one thing we haven't shown you is how to make your search case insensitive. So you would remember with the one example where we had the capital the. We know that the occurs in more lines. Okay, but because we've capitalized the, it's only found the capitalized thes throughout the text. And that is because we mentioned right at the beginning of this little portion of the lesson that grep is case sensitive, right? So there is a flag to make it case insensitive as well. And it's very aptly just an I. So let's combine all of those options. So let's do -n, which will print the line where it occurs. Let's do -w, which will confine it to the word boundary. And now we'll add -i, which means that whatever pattern we pass it is case insensitive. So whether the words have capital letters or small letters or whatever it might be, lowercase, it'll still find it. So now when we run it, now we're finding capital this and sentences or lines with the small the. It's printed as where they occur, and just not, and found still confined it to the word boundaries the. So that thesis line, for example, does not pop up here because we've added the -w flag or option. Okay, So these are some of the most useful options that you're probably going to use when you go forward. There are some other options that I don't think I'm really going to spend too much time demonstrating now. But if you want to take a look at whatever else is on offer, you can just do a grep minus help, and you can see lots of different options that you can use that will help you search differently through some of these files. So yeah, play around with it a little bit when you have a bit more time and see what kind of searching you can do. Okay, so I'm going to quickly just switch to find so that at least we've demonstrated this to you because we are running out of time. So like I mentioned right in the beginning when I was just sort of outlining what we would do with this lesson, I mentioned that grep essentially matches patterns in files, whereas the find command, so it's literally find, like the word find, finds the actual files themselves within directories or structures or whatever it might be. Again, find also has several options. I'll just demonstrate a couple now, but you're welcome to use grep. I'm sorry, find minus help and go and explore some of those options again when you have a little bit more time, of course. Okay, so we are in exercise data writing. I just want to check if that is where we should be, if we need to move just a level up. Okay, let's move just one level up. So let's do a change directory ... Seems like we should be in the exercise directory for the find demonstration. So the first thing you can do is just type find and then type dot. So when we type find and we type dot, what do you think is going to happen? How is this command going to function? What do you think it's looking for? Yandile, you're saying looks for full stops. So I understand why you said that. And traditionally, you wouldn't be wrong. And kind of, you're not wrong. Also, you're kind of right. I want to take you back to when we did the ls minus a. Remember when we ran this yesterday? And we spoke about these two hidden sort of directories. This meant one level up the parent directory, and the one dot here represents your current working directory. And we said that we would start to demonstrate some examples where you can start to use this. We didn't do it very often during these few lessons, but now is an opportunity that we can demonstrate how this one full stop works. So when I typed find dot, I'm just going to run it and I'll show you what comes out. Okay. This dot here represents current working directory, and your current working directory is your exercise data. We didn't specify anything specific for it to find, so it went and found every file that exists within the exercise data directory. So you can see here, you see these animal counts. So it's found all the folders and then everything that's contained in the folders. I'm sure you understand file paths a little bit better now, so you'll understand what's happening here. So from the current working directory, we're descending down. So we've got the animal counts, and then within animal counts, we've got a couple of files. We've got a backup file. You can see that here. We've got the backup file, and then there are things in the backup file, which we created. If you recall, we created the backup file. Then we've got creatures, and inside of creatures, we've got those .dat data sets. We've got protein, and then within proteins, we've got the PDP. So it's literally gone and listed just everything that's in the directory because we didn't tell it to find anything specific, right? Interesting. So now let's use a couple of other options and let's see if we can make our outputs look a little bit different or find some specific things. So the first thing we can show you is you can tell it to find a specific type of file. So I can say, just show me all the files within the current working directory. Working directory, only type files. Okay, so I don't want directories, I want files. So now it's gone and just pulled out all the files. If you notice here, it also listed the directories and then also the files. Now I just have the files listed here. Similarly, you could have just pulled out the directories, but you can also pattern match a lot like we pattern match in grep. But it's slightly different on find, of course. The options are structured differently. But again, let's just run find on our current working directory. But this time, let's specify that we're looking for a specific file name or specific names of files. So we'll do the wildcard.txt. So we're saying find any files with any names that end in .txt, for example. Let's run that. And you see we've got numbers.txt. I just want to do an ls just to demonstrate why it only found this, because remember we're running this in our current working directory. So the only .txt file in our current working directory is this txt file, the numbers.txt. That's why I didn't run through everything, because we've specified now that within the current working directory, we're looking for a file with a specific name. So it didn't need to go to any other level because the text file existed here. Okay, so that's how you can also sort of search by name. I just want to see if there are any other things I want to quickly demonstrate to you before we need to end off. Let me think. What else can we demonstrate? Yeah, so I just want to show you maybe how this command would differ if we put this in quotation marks. Okay, so now it's actually found more. Can you think of why it would have found more files? Because we added the quotation marks. Maybe conceptually, this is something that I maybe didn't explain too well in some of the other lessons, but can you think of why it would have had this effect? Yandile, go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about the, it's not exactly what you're doing now. Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, you can go ahead.
About the find, can you use double full stops to find the ancestors for the specific directory we're under?
So I think it would depend how you've structured where you wanted to look. So if you had maybe added that to this file path over here, then that might work, yeah. So then you can specify go a level up and look down, or specified it here. So you could have said .. / shell listen data or something like that, and then you could have looked for these files as well. So maybe let's try that.
No,
I'll come back
not this. I'm not talking about this one. I'm talking about when it's just find dot, right? When it's only find
Yeah.
dot, you're looking for the children and the descendants of
Only children and
exercise
descendants.
data, right?
Yeah.
But then if it was find dot, would it look for the shell lesson data in desktop only? Would that be what it prints out?
So let's see. It's not the thing is we can play around. It's okay. We don't have a lot of time, but let's demonstrate this and let's see what happens. Let's see if find works that way. And this is a good thing that you're bringing up here now, because a lot of what we've done has been done in a very specific way, right? But the shell is actually very flexible, and you can combine things and combine scripts in ways if you just understand what you're doing. So you can combine shortcuts even, with different scripts, and you can look at what it does. It probably is going to behave the same way you think it's going to behave. Maybe sometimes it doesn't, but a lot of the times it does. So this, we have run find, and we have told it go one directory up, because remember, this directory does exist. We saw that when we did ls minus a. Where did we do that? Okay, let me maybe not run up all the way. But when we did ls minus a, we do know that this does exist within all of our file paths. So when we type anything ... we know it's going to run one level up. So yeah, cool. Okay, we are 10 minutes to the wire. So maybe let me just talk through the final example I just quickly wanted to show you. So it would be find dot minus name. And I was trying to demonstrate the utility of adding the quotation marks and how it changes the output. Okay, if I press enter, you remember previously we didn't have the quotation marks, and so it only found numbers.txt, this one. Yeah, it only found numbers.txt within the current directory. You can see it's in the current directory. But now when we've added inverted commas, it's now expanded to include all the .txt files. So I kind of hinted at this when we were doing the for loops, but maybe I didn't say it so explicitly. But usually when the wildcard is on a command, what the command's going to do is expand that wildcard first and then run it. That is when you don't have quotation marks. So when I mean by expand, it's going to look within the current directory firstly for a name that matches .txt, and the wildcard will expand that name. So what we were actually looking for is numbers.txt. And so that's what it found. When we add the quotation marks, we are telling it limited, don't expand it, find this particular pattern, asterisk.txt. So what we were telling it here is don't expand it, but find all the files that in .txt. And so that's why it's found it here. Conceptually, it might not be so easy to understand, and I don't have too much time to explain it now, but just think about it a little bit. And maybe if you go back to the for loop section and work through a couple of those examples, you might also understand what I mean a little bit better. But we are 9 minutes to the end of the session. So I am going to sort of do a bit of a wrap up there. I just firstly want to say thank you for everybody for being on the call, for staying on the call, and for bearing with us. This is actually the first time I've taught this complete lesson by myself, so I do want to say thank you. I realized there were some slip-ups and things here and there, but hopefully I've done an okay job, and you're excited about the command line, and you actually come back and do a little bit more. Obviously, the command line is much more complex than what we've presented here. There are a lot of other command line programs that you can, look into and start using that will do different things to different types of data or behave differently. So this is really just a foundation, but you can definitely scale up from here. And the few commands we've taught throughout this last couple of days will really take you like 50-60% of the way. You're going to repeat these commands all the time. You'll see it in scripts. People will ask you, copy this from here to there. So you understand, how the commands function for the most part, but most importantly, you understand how to get a bit of help. So again, I hope that this was good, but I thought we could just leave maybe a few minutes for some informal feedback. So we can definitely perhaps stop the recording here so that nobody is too worried about us recording the feedback. But just a very big thank you to everybody for being here. And that's a wrap for the Unix session.
Just before we move on to the feedback, well, first, thank you, Verena, of course, and I'm sure you'll have great feedback. But For tomorrow, everybody will need a GitHub account set up to do the exercises. So I'm putting the link, it's just github.com, and make sure that you sign up for free for tomorrow. And now I can stop the recording and we can have a real chat.
Thank you so much, Nikita. Yeah, so just a note that